This page right then, it's the front cover of N64 Magazine. Big and bold, N64 Magazine at the top, can't miss it. The UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag, it proudly declares. And they weren't wrong, were they? Good times. Right in the middle, Joanna Dark staring right out at you, gun in hand. It's all about Perfect Dark, world's first review apparently. GoldenEye beating brilliance, they reckon. Bit of a claim, but we all know how hyped we were for this. 16 pages, it shouts in a red box, so they really were pushing it. Up top left, first shots, Mario Tennis. Mario in his tennis whites looked a bit different to the usual platforming fare, didn't it? And a bit of Turok 3 peeking out from the corner there too. Find out how it plays. Well, we did, didn't we? Dinosaurs and guns, good stuff. Down the left, latest news on, followed by a list of upcoming games. Zelda, Majora's Mask, intriguing game details revealed. Always with the Zelda hype, weren't they? The world is not enough, exciting new shots and info. Bond game tie-in, naturally. Tony Hawk score big with our stunt guide. Everyone was trying to ollie by then, weren't they? And finally, Operation Winback stealth-tastic tips. Stealth was getting big thanks to Metal Gear Solid, eh? Bottom left, P-Lus, Planet Game Boy for the handheld fans. The original and best Game Boy mag inside, it says. Bit cheeky that. Issue 42, June 2000, £3.25. Good cover, get straight to the point about what's inside. Look! Flip up your free double game guide. Always loved those little freebies in mags. Probably about Pokemon Stadium, judging by the little picture. Yeah, typical magazine cover from back in the day. This page is the welcome to N64 Magazine, issue 42 from June 2000. It's laying it on thick, saying they are Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo mag. Apparently they're getting all the hot news from Europe, Japan and America. They reckon they don't just copy stuff off the internet and are written by proper Nintendo fans, which you'd hope so, wouldn't you? They make a point of saying they'll review everything and be independent, so no dodgy reviews then. Don't be fooled by feeble imitations. They boldly state, bit strong isn't it, Berksy? There's a little story called Perfect Plan, about getting Pokemon Stadium in for review. Bit dramatic, mentioning Martin and Mark and a sticky label. Sounds like a proper operation. Taya. Then it's got a, just look what we've got for you this month, section, highlighting the big games. Mario Tennis on page 18, first shots of Mario's latest sporting outing. Zelda Majora's Mask on page 6, with gameplay details and more screenshots. The World Is Not Enough on page 20, that's the Eurocom Bond game. Turok 3. Shadow of Oblivion on page 28, first playtest of Acclaim's new Dino Blaster. Sounds a bit naff, doesn't it? Perfect Dark on page 47, claiming, the wait's finally over. Big words, hope it's good. And Pokemon Stadium on page 35, with an expert battle guide, probably linked to that Perfect Plan story. It also lists all the staff, editor Andrea Ball, deputy editor Mark Green, art editor Justin Webb, deputy art editor Paul Edwards, reviews editor Martin Kitts, and a load of other names in production and contributing. Plus all the usual address and contact details for future publishing. Next issue is out Monday the 12th of June, with something amazing on page 120 apparently. Right then, let's see what else is in this magazine. This page is the contents page for issue 42 of N64 Magazine, dated June 2000. Right at the top, it proudly declares itself the UK's best-selling independent Nintendo mag. Seems a bit boastful, but fair enough. Looks like the magazine is split into sections. Planet 64 kicks things off on page 12, then N64 Arena for the UK stuff starting page 44, and Import Arena way back at page 68 for the Japanese and American games. Looking at the highlights, News Desk on page 12 promises the latest on the Game Boy Advance, which was a big deal back then, and something about Burger King toys. Those were always a bit hit and miss, weren't they? Coming soon, on page 18 is teasing upcoming games. Always good to see what's on the horizon. There's a Mario Tennis bit on page 18, mentioning Waluigi. He was a new face back then, wasn't he? Page 20 has, The World Is Not Enough, the Bond game. Do pay attention, it says, a bit cryptic. Banjo-Tooie gets a mention on page 21 with new shots that was highly anticipated after the first Banjo-Kazooie. The regulars section includes the information station, previews of the next issue, and N64, where Mario and pals crash the Masters, whatever that means. Planet Game Boy is there too, with driver reviewed, and tips for GB Gallery 3, and Pokemon Pinball. Right at the bottom, Mario Party 2 is on page 64, dice rolled, coins grabbed and balls balanced. Sounds like Mario Party, alright, second annual party it says. Lastly, page 68 has Kirby 64, the long overdue return of our favourite pink blob. Kirby's always reliable for some platforming fun. So yeah, That's what's inside this issue. This page is the contents page for the magazine. Right at the top it says N64 Future Look, showing us what's coming soon. We've got Zelda Majora's Mask with latest gameplay details revealed. That was a bit of a weird one, wasn't it? Quite dark compared to Ocarina. Then there's Duck Dodgers making his first appearance in an N64 platformer. I remember thinking that was a bit of an odd choice at the time. And lastly for future games, it's Excitebike 64 with a pile of new shots of Nintendo's nippy motorbike racer. Excitebike, always a solid arcade racer, but maybe a bit simple compared to some of the stuff on the horizon. Moving down, it's got N64 Club 64, the ultimate reader service, which is basically the magazine's reader section. Then under How To, it's Tony Hawk Skateboarding. Score big with Tony Hawk Skateboarding. Everyone was mad for Tony Hawk back then, that game was everywhere. And Be King of the Road in Ridge Racer 64, a decent enough conversion of the arcade game, I suppose. Then Win in Operation Winback. Operation Winback, that was a bit of a clunky shooter if I remember right. Warrington Nelville. Next up is Club 64 Mailbox. You ask Nelville way, and we answer. Or try to. War. Pretty standard letters page stuff. Tips Extra, with top tips for South Park Rally, Vigilante 8, and DK64 action replay codes. South Park Rally? Bit of a cash-in really. Vigilante 8 was alright though, a bit of car combat fun. Action replay codes. Essential for some games, let's be honest. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. Whatever the ailment, he's got the cure. That was the magazine's advice column. Game On, happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. Yep, Game On's a year old. Celebrating the Game On section's anniversary, it seems. I'm the best. Prove your gaming skills to the nation. Leading into Skill Club 64. Those leagues are filling up. Inc. That was their online competition thing, I think. Then directory over 3 years worth of N64 games reviewed and rated. The magazine's index of reviews, always handy. And lastly, back issues and subscriptions. Get the mag delivered to your door, or fill the gaps in your N64 collection. Standard sub-info and back issue plug. The big features this month are Perfect Dark. The year's most eagerly anticipated game arrives, and we've got 16 packed pages on it. Yeah, Perfect Dark, everyone was waiting for that one, Rare trying to follow up GoldenEye. Then there's Special Investigation Turok 3, 6 pages of guns and gore from this fantastic shooter. Turok 3, more dinosaurs and shooting, what's not to like if you're into that sort of thing. Finally, Breaking the Law's Gravity? Pah! We expose the N64 characters who flout fundamental scientific laws. Woo! With a picture of Mario doing some dodgy physics on a blackboard, a bit of light-hearted fun to finish it off. All in all, looks like a pretty packed issue for June 2000. This page is a sneak peek at upcoming N64 games, under the Future Look banner in N64 Magazine. Zelda Majora's Mask is the main feature, and it's got a big splash with screenshots and an info burst box. They're showing off Zora Link underwater and Goron Link's rolling attack, classic stuff. They even point out that sword controls are just like Ocarina, good to know. There's a bit about a weird interior in Clock Tower Village, and a hidden albino frog. Sounds typically Zelda bizarre, doesn't it? The info burst tells us it's coming from Nintendo, is a 256 megabit cart, one player only, expansion pack, and rumble pack, compatible rumble, yes please. But no controller or transfer packs. It's slated for Christmas, in the US and April, over here in the UK. Typical. Anticipation rating is 5 Red Balls, meaning they're pretty hyped. And rightly so, it's Zelda after all. Then there's a quick mention of Duck Dodgers, a platformer from Infogrames. Page 8 for more info. And Excitebike 64 gets a line, latest news on Nintendo's Racer. Page 10. Looks like issue 42 is going to be a good one for future releases. Oh, and there's a note to check out the Coming Soon section on page 18 if you want even more new games. Go! Oh wait, not meant to say that bit. Anyway, that's the gist of this page. Zelda looking good as always, and a couple of other games on the horizon. This page talks about Majora's Mask, which back then was just around the corner, thankfully pushed forward to April, for the Japanese at least. It's funny how they were getting dribs and drabs of info, and suddenly it was a flood of screenshots. Classic Nintendo, eh? Apparently the Japanese tele-advert was the big reveal, showing Zelda's Do-Eyes would be making an appearance in Majora's Mask. Not just her though, the whole cast list was apparently packed with familiar faces from Ocarina, even those cheeky Malon sisters running Lon Lon Ranch, in both kid and adult versions. And you'd be racing against Ingos on horseback, through some tree-filled forest. Sounds a bit like a japes. The article bangs on about the sense of scale in Majora's Mask being breathtaking. They mention vast watery bits and sweeping grasslands, with weather and even lava pools where Goron Link can strut about. The visuals are supposed to be top-notch, especially the Deku Link face with the torchlight. Intriguing new bits and bobs were coming out all the time, like the day and night cycle. One day in Hyrule is a whole 24 hours in real time. Mental. It's crammed with mini-games, familiar faces and objects. There's an archery game where you're pinging deformed orange pose. They reckon the screenshots are more reassuringly Zelda-like after some of the garish stuff they'd seen. Link's crossing rickety bridges with ice statues, plunging his sword into flaming skulls, all the usual lark. Your trusty wind instruments on the C button, and Ocarina of Time owners will feel right at home. Instead of Nevi, there's a glittery yellow fairy-keeping Link company, which they say makes up for Nevi's absence. Thank God for that. Has it? There are some control changes too. A new Mario-style ZY button for dodging the nasties that appear in the dark. Mostly Hyrule is packed with mini-games and characters we know, proper Ocarina vibes. There's a little bit about the moon as well, under Man in the Moon. They always knew Majora's Mask was going to be darker than Ocarina, but apparently the Japanese telead really rammed that home, showing the moon descending towards Hyrule with a right grimace on its face. Apparently there were frightening in-game shots of Link fighting, Princess Zelda screaming, and Hyrule getting blown to bits. They even have a little dig at some tagline they saw, calling it blatantly sexist, cheeky sods. The screenshots show a proper moody-looking moon, a reminder that it's not all kids' stuff. Flaming skulls are back, described as tough little beggars, which they are, infuriating little things. There's a glimpse of the underwater city with Zora Link, and a shot showing Deku Link being shorter than his usual self. They point out that the levels are pleasingly large, and even shopkeepers are rocking sunglasses. Hyrule finally getting a bit of fashion sense, eh? It ends with a to be continued, promising a big handsome playtest in the next issue, number 43. So, more to come next month then. This page features a first look at Duck Do, or rather Duck Dodgers as it's properly called, Infogrames' new Warner Bros. Platformer for the N64. Right, so it's Duck Dodgers, starring Daffy Duck in space. Looking at the screenshots, they've gone for that classic 50s Warner Bros. Cartoon vibe, which is a decent touch. Apparently the level design is pretty good, comparing it to Donkey Kong 64, which is high praise indeed for the visuals at the time. Gorrington Dorcas. The info burst box tells us it's a 128 megabit cart, single player, and uses all the pack add-ons, apart from the transfer pack. Who even used that anyway? Release is down as June for both the US and UK, Japan is TBA. Anticipation rating is 4 out of 5, so they're clearly thinking it'll be a good one. There are little snippets of info scattered around the page with the screenshots. Planet X is the goal, naturally. They mentioned Daffy's keyboard. What for? Your guess is as good as mine. Marvin the Martian is in it. Can't remember his catchphrase, but apparently, it's funny. We're promised a bunch of Warner Bros. Characters from both this game and Tasmania, which is a bit of a random crossover. There's a sparkly power-up glow on Daffy, and a minecart section is teased, because why not have a minecart bit in a space platformer? Apparently no speech in cutscenes, but Daffy's usual gobbledygook is all over the shop, which is what you'd expect. And in a bit of a strange observation, they point out Daffy sinks in water up to his waist even though he's a duck. Go figure, as they say. All in all, it looks like a fairly promising platformer. Could be a laugh. This page is all about a preview of the upcoming Duck Dodgers game on the N64. Looks like they're calling it DGERS Marzaquax, which is a bit of a mouthful. It's based on the classic cartoon with Daffy Duck as Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, parodying Buck Rogers and those old sci-fi serials. Bits like Roadrunner and Tom and Jerry, proper Chucklefest classics they were. Infogrames are behind it, using Paradigm, who did Pilotwings 64 to make it. They're saying it's a platformer that manages to bring the Looney Tunes characters into 3D without losing their personality, which is what you want really. They've got screenshots showing some cave level, and another one with a minecart section, because who doesn't love a minecart level? Apparently they've been looking at what Nintendo and Rare have done with platformers to make sure this one works, which is a good sign. Cheshire. Visually they seem impressed, saying Daffy's expressions are great and change throughout the levels. Gameplay-wise, they mention running, jumping, shooting, and even some swimming and rocket riding. They're even comparing the shooting to Rayman 2, which is high praise at the time as that was a decent platformer. They mention ACME gadgets will be in there too, naturally. It sounds promising. They reckon it's a promising looking non-Nintendo/Rare platformer, which is kind of what everyone was after on the N64, something to fill the gap. They're saying we'll get the full review in a couple of months, so we'll have to wait and see if it lives up to the hype. They also joke you can almost hear Mel Blanc's voice, who did the original voice of Daffy, which is a nice touch. Looks like Porky Pig is in it as well, offering hints. They even make a dig at Tonic Trouble and Gex, calling Gex despicable. Bit harsh maybe, but Gex was a bit naff to be fair. They'll have more on Daffy's adventures next month, apparently. This page is all about Excitebike 64, and blimey, were we waiting for this one? Nintendo's rip-roaring racer is just around the corner, it screams at the top. Looking at the screenshots, you can see they've properly dragged Excitebike kicking and screaming into 3D. It's not just flat 2D tracks anymore, we're talking proper jumps, stunts, and what looks like some pretty varied courses. They're boasting about sprawling sand dunes, mountain paths, forest tracks, and even an ice course with snow falling, which sounds pretty ambitious for the time. There's an info burst box that gives you the nitty-gritty. 128 megabit cart size, which was pretty chunky back then. 1 to 4 players, so decent for multiplayer sessions. Controller pack and transfer pack are a no-go, but Rumble pack and expansion pack are in, which is good. Release dates are down as May 1st in the US, June 16th in the UK, and TBA for Japan. Anticipation rating is 5 red blobs out of 5, so they're pretty hyped for it. Brecca. The text talks about it being a follow-up to the original NES Excitebike, saying it's unrecognizable from that 1985 game with the tiny bikers in fixed lanes. Now in the year 2000 they've gone full 3D, and the bikers can weave all over the shop doing stunts. Apparently half of the 12 tracks are in a stadium, and the rest are across these varied outdoor environments. They even mention slippy slidey ice course, with snow-covered trees and proper falling snowflakes. Sounds a bit much, doesn't it? They also sneak in mentions of Majora's Mask and Banjo-Tooie release dates being close, so it was a good time for N64 owners back then, plenty of games coming out. Overall, they seem well impressed with Excitebike 64, saying Nintendo are finally getting their act together. We'll see about that when we actually get our hands on it, won't we? This page is all about Excitebike 64, and it's looking pretty decent actually. They're calling it Wheel Suite, which is a bit cheesy, even for back then. It seems they're really pushing the visuals, especially with the expansion pack, making the backgrounds and bikes look extra detailed. They're banging on about the slippy slidey ice course, and the snow-covered trees, saying it's all very realistic with bikes tilting and skidding. There are screenshots showing off different bits of the game. One shows a race through some trees, another on a snowy track, and there's even a shot of a football match, Excitebike soccer apparently, which sounds utterly bonkers but also kind of brilliant in a very N64 kind of way. They're talking about doing stunts and getting bonus points, with 28 different aerial moves in total. Reminds me of 1080 snowboarding and wave race, in that stunt-focused arcadey Nintendo style. They're having a bit of a dig at Supercross 2000 and Jeremy McGrath, calling him abominable, which is strong stuff. Sounds like they reckon Excitebike 64 is going to blow it out of the water and claim the motocross crown. They're promising a full review in the next issue, so it seems like they are pretty excited about it. Overall, it's looking like a solid bit of N64 fun, if a bit over the top in places, but hey, that was the style back then. This page is from the news desk section of Planet 64, and it's all about the big reveal of the Game Boy Advance. Back in the day, this was massive news. Everyone was buzzing about the next Nintendo handheld. They had shown it off to developers at a conference in Seattle, which sounded a bit fancy. Apparently it was supposed to be about the same size as the Game Boy Color but wider, like a Neo Geo Pocket, remember them? And with a much better screen, which was always needed on the old Game Boys, wasn't it? They were saying it wouldn't be out until early 2001 in Japan. Typical? We'd have to wait even longer over here, naturally. Apparently what we're seeing in the pictures are just mock-ups, made by Nintendo's UK people. It's interesting they point out it's got fewer buttons than the SNES controller, missing the X and Y, which they reckon could make SNES ports a bit tricky. They demoed Yoshi's Story on it to show off what it could do, things like scaling and stretching, and Mode 7, Kawi. There are little sections about what the GBA can do. Boy Wonder talks about rumors comparing it to the PlayStation, but Nintendo wanted to set the record straight on what it actually was. Stretch is about pushing and pulling 2D stuff, good for games like Super Mario World apparently. Scale is about zooming in and out, again, Yoshi's Story was used as an example, and they mention it being good for giant bosses in Super Metroid. Now that's talking. And Mode 7, they're saying it can do the Mode 7 effect just like the SNES, which is great for making 2D floors look 3D. That would be brilliant for SNES games on the go, wouldn't it? All in all, it was a very exciting time for handheld gaming. We were all eager to see what this new Game Boy could really do. This page from Planet 64 is giving us a rundown in shortcuts, kicking off with Pokémon Stadium absolutely flying off the shelves, shifting 36,000 copies in its first 3 days in the UK, and 1 million in America. Seems like everyone was Pokémon at the time. Then there's a bit of a Pokeballs up with Pokerong, Seems the European versions of Stadium missed out on the gallery mode, which is a bit cheeky if you were expecting it. Mind you, at least there's Poker Food 4, with Welch's Jelly doing a Pokemon tie and offering Game Boy Colors as prizes. You just needed a barcode from the jelly packet to enter. Sneaky, like they say. Then there's Dolphin Speak, which is all about the new Nintendo console they're calling Dolphin. Surprise, surprise. This issue is about networking. Apparently it's going to have internet access like Sega's Dreamcast or use a phone line, which sounds a bit archaic now, but the interesting bit is they're going to be able to link it up to the Game Boy Advance using the controller port. Imagine that, your handheld talking to your home console. They reckon the controller ports will be identical to the N64, so your old pads should still work. Polygons is talking about the Game Boy Advance and its 3D power, saying it's got more grunt than the SNES, which is doing it a bit of a disservice. The SNES was no slouch. They mention Starwing and Super Mario Kart's examples of SNES 3D visuals. Reckon the GBA will handle Super Mario Kart no problem. Finally, the N64 diary is giving us a peek at what's coming up. Looks like Pokemon Stadium Cup for the N64 is due out in May, as is Operation Winback, which looked like a bit of a stylish shooter, all stealth and strategy. They're also saying Download Mew, the 151st Pokemon, will be available in the UK in May, ready for download onto Pokemon carts. That's pretty cool. And Perfect Dark USA is out on May 22nd for you lucky Americans. We'd have to wait to import that one, no doubt. N64 Magazine issue 43 is coming June 12th, with a Majora's Mask feature, E3 show news, and a secret Perfect Dark preview. Sounds like a bumper issue. This page kicks off with a bit of movie news, talking about the first Pokemon film being massive in cinemas at the time, even knocking Lake Placid off the top spot. Some crocodile movie, I think. They mention seeing queues from their office, which must have been in London, I guess. Then there's a piece about Pokemon cards causing trouble in schools. Apparently, head teachers were moaning about kids getting obsessed with them, and aggressive trading going on. Sounds about right, kids were mad for Pokemon cards back then, trading them all the time. Next up, Pokemon TV. They're talking about the BBC show Watchdog, the consumer show, calling Pokemon pure evil, and warning kids about emotional and financial bankruptcy. Bit extreme, isn't it? But that was the media back then. Always blowing things out of proportion. Arisa. The main chunk of the page is about E3. E3, the big games show in LA. This is talking about the upcoming one in May. And they're saying it's going to be amazing for N64 and Game Boy Advance owners. They reckon Nintendo is going to steal the show, and PlayStation and Dreamcast are going to be a bit disappointing. Cheeky. They've got a list of games expected to be there, including Perfect Dark, Zelda Majora's Mask, Super Mario Advance, Banjo-Tooie, Resident Evil 0, Eternal Darkness, and loads more like Man 64, Rika, Speedway USA, Hey You Pikachu, Shadow of Oblivion, Stunt Racer 64, Pokemon Attack, Duck Dodgers, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Ready 2 Rumble Boxing 2, X-Men, and The World Is Not Enough. Quite a lineup, lots to look forward to for us, N64 fans. Coolga. Finally, there's a competition to win Chowit's goodies. You had to answer a question. Which of these characters is not a sugary confection-loving Pokemon? The options are Chewtwo, Chewmander, and Jennifer Love Chewit. Bit of a silly question really. Jennifer Love Chewit is clearly the odd one out. Sounds like someone having a laugh with the names. The prize was a load of Chewit stuff. A record bag, a year's supply of Chewit, a Gigaleg, a mouse mat, a pencil case, a cassette player, a camera, and some film processing. Not bad if you were a kid with a sweet tooth. You had to send your answer into their Bath address. Those were the days, posting things in the post for competitions. This page is all about the Burger King Pokemon promotion they were running back in the day. Seems like Team 64 went and sampled the goods, purely for research. They mention racking up 139 cheeseburgers and over 4,000 French fries to collect all these toys. Dedication, eh? They've reviewed a few different types of toys. First up is the Beanie, a Polywhirl toy. They're not too impressed, reckon the colours are wrong, stitching's a bit rushed, and the proportions are off. Only scored a 54%. Bit harsh, maybe? Then there's the Light Up Mewtwo, which they seem to like a bit more, calling it More Like It. Apparently you can pose it and humiliate Mewtwo. They're definitely having a laugh. It lights up by twisting its tail, no batteries needed, which is pretty neat for a fast food toy. Gets an 88%, so a decent score. Next is the Rev Top Electrode. They describe it as a thoroughly bizarre concept. You drag it along the floor and it spins around. Sounds a bit rubbish to be honest, and they give it 52%, so yeah, not great. The Talking Pika is a Pikachu toy that screams Pikachu, or chatters. They're amazed it works without batteries, calling it witchcraft. Bit over the top maybe, but they seem impressed, giving it 89%. Keyring Pokemon are next. They picked 13 Pokemon to be keyrings, and they reckon they are a bit dangerous, might cause cuts and bruises in your trouser pockets. Real risk, they say. Dramatic as always. They are colourful and solid though, and you can twizzle their arms and legs. 70%, not bad. The launcher is a Sandshrew, spring-assisted magic, apparently. You press a button and it shoots off. They say the wheels buckle and cause it to stop suddenly. Still, they think they make cracking catapults, and give it 81%. Lastly, the squirter is a Kabutops. Idea is you fill it with water and squirt your mates. They couldn't get it to work properly, hole too small to pour water in, and it just emits a horrible rubbery smell. 48%. Ouch. At the bottom, there's a competition to win a load of Poketoys and a trading card. The question is, what does Farfetch never leave the house without? The answers are American Express, spring onion, or a gun. Right cheeky, isn't it? Answer is spring onion, of course. You had to send a postcard in by the 14th of June. Probably too late for that now. Go! Go! At the end. Bit enthusiastic for them. This page delves into the simplistic sports games of yesteryear, right? It's got a header called Retro World, which is a bit of a giveaway. Up top in the corner, there's a bit about pupil problems. Some kid in California getting compensation over his Pokemon cards. Apparently they were confiscated at school. Sounds a bit American, doesn't it? Suing over Pokemon cards. Then next to that, there's Feline Frolics, about Mew coming to the UK for Pokemon. They were flying it in on a Pikachu aeroplane, apparently. Bit much if you ask me. All that fuss for a cartoon mouse. The main article talks about old-school sports games, focusing on their simplicity. First up, it's International Karate from 1985 on the Spectrum. They're saying its origins are on the Amiga, but it goes back further than that to the C64 originally. They mention the Game Boy Color version review is on page 38, so this is kind of tying into that. They call it eye-glazingly uninspiring, bit harsh, but yeah, compared to later games it was pretty basic. Stereotypical Oriental music, kung fu get-up, one-hit kills, roundhouse kicks, classic stuff. Even if it wasn't groundbreaking, we played it back in the day. Then it moves on to Smash Tennis from 1993 on the SNES. They're saying with all the Mario Tennis hype, it made them nostalgic for Smash Tennis. Wimbledon atmosphere in your living room, all that. They say it was humorous, not serious, like those po-faced tennis games. No McEnroe-style outbursts, just smiling players who'd play tennis anywhere, even the beach or desert. They mention Namco keep updating the Smash Tennis series, and now they've gone with Anna Kournikova's endorsement, but only on PlayStation. Bit of a dig at them for going PlayStation exclusive, saying if Camelot knows tennis like they know golf, who needs Namco anyway? Bit cheeky that last line from Mark Green. This page is all about the upcoming Mario Tennis 64 on the N64. Blimey, remember that? Seems like Nintendo were teasing us with some new pictures of it. Warrington, there's a Q&A bit where they're talking about Waluigi, Luigi's so-called evil cousin. Apparently he was mistaken for Dick Dastardly, which is a bit of a deep-cut cartoon reference for the younger readers, I suppose. They're saying he's thinner than Luigi, and got a Wario-style nose and spiky moustache. Sounds a bit of a weirdo, doesn't he? Ahka. Wah. There are some screenshots of the game itself. Lakitu, who normally films in Mario games, has been demoted to being a ball boy. Poor bloke. They reckon with less fat on him, Luigi should thrash Mario. Bit harsh on Mario there, isn't it? They are a bit sarcastic about Waluigi's name as well, saying they despair of Ninty sometimes. Another screenshot highlights the camera view being sensible and helping with doubles play. And they mention effects-laden shots look even better than Mario Golf, which is a big claim. Mario Golf was pretty decent. Then there's an info burst box, you know, the usual stats. From Nintendo, cartridge size is 128 megabits, up to 4 players, no controller or expansion pack needed, but Rumble and Transfer Pack are yes. Release date-wise, Japan gets it in July, but for the US and UK it's just TBA, typical. Anticipation rating is 4 Red Bulls, so they're pretty hyped for it. Taya. The main article reckons we should love Nintendo for revealing this game out of nowhere. They say it apes the style of Namco's Super Tennis games on the SNES, with top-down views of grass and clay courts, and simple controls. They mention Mario, Luigi, Yoshi and Peach all look great in the game. Apparently you can transfer characters between the N64 and Game Boy Color version using the transfer pack, which is a neat idea. They'll have a full report from E3 next issue, so more to come then. All in all, Mario Tennis 64 was looking like a bit of alright, if you were into tennis games anyway. This page is all about Resident Evil 0. Now this is interesting, isn't it? An N64 exclusive prequel to the PlayStation Resident Evil games. They're showing off some screenshots, looks like Rebecca Chambers is back, and there's a new bloke called Billy. They are talking about switching between the two characters, which is a new twist. The item boxes are different apparently, which might upset some purists. There's a Q&A section. Someone is asking about FMV. On the smaller N64 carts they reckon they'll cut down on it, but the story will be there. And a question about D-pad or analog stick for RE2. Analog stick is the way to go, obviously. Horyu. The info burst table at the side gives us the details Capcom are making it. 256 megabit cart, 1 player, Rumble Pack yes, Expansion Pack and Transfer Pack no. Release is autumn in Japan, no date for us yet. Anticipation is high with a full 5 Red Bulls. So, Resident Evil 0 on the N64, prequel to the PlayStation games, dual characters, pre-rendered backgrounds, coming in autumn for Japan, maybe later for us. Interesting stuff. This page is all about The World Is Not Enough on the N64. Right then. So it seems Inoue are trying to muscle in on Rare's territory with this Bond game, aiming for a first-person shooter that's apparently trying to beat GoldenEye at its own game. Bold words, considering GoldenEye was pretty much the benchmark for console shooters back then. They've got some screenshots, looking alright, a bit blocky mind you, but it's the N64, what do you expect? They're talking up the graphics engine, calling it TYNE, saying it's got reflections and real-time lighting without dropping frames. The business, apparently, sounds like marketing speak, but we'll see. Bok. There's a Q&A section, bit generic really. 40 weapons and gadgets apparently. Pistols, machine guns, mines, the usual Bond stuff. They're promising it's not all just blasting, more cerebral mission objectives like GoldenEye. Let's hope so. Just running and gunning gets old fast. Warrington Mail Focus. Level locations mentioned are the bombed MI6 building, a speedboat chase on the Thames, jungles in Azerbaijan. Typical Bond globetrotting. They mention frozen mountains, a caviar factory hacked by a helicopter. Sounds a bit much, even for Bond. And a final showdown on a Turkish sub. Sounds like they're lifting straight from the film, which isn't always a bad thing. And Robbie Coltrane's back, Denise Richards. Hopefully, they got them to do some voice work too, makes it feel a bit more legit. Reservations? Well, the reviewer thinks the weapons could sound a bit meatier, worries they might stray into pop gun territory. Fair point, weak guns ruin a shooter, but overall, they reckon Twine looks phenomenal. Bit strong, but okay. There's an info burst table, which tells us the game is on a 256 megabit cartridge, supports 14 players, no controller pack needed, but it does use the expansion and rumble packs. Standard stuff for the time. They reckon it's out in autumn in the UK, TBA for Japan, and US release sometime too. Anticipation rating is 5 orange blobs, so they're clearly quite hyped. Impressive stuff, maybe it will give Perfect Dark a run for its money, we'll have to wait and see. This page has got a feature on Banjo-Tooie, which we were all proper buzzing for back then, weren't we? It's saying the release date is still on for that year, July in the US and October, for us here in the UK, typical. They reckon the levels are even bigger than Donkey Kong 64, which was already massive, so that's saying something. Apparently you can kick Kazooie out of Banjo's backpack, Mumbo's playable now, and it's gonna look amazing on the N64, especially with the expansion pack. They're showing off a few screenshots of bosses and bits of gameplay, looks proper good. And there's also a Q&A section, talking about boss fights being inspiring and the levels having precision jumping and puzzles and that. They're asking if it's better than DK64, and they're playing it safe saying, maybe not better, but certainly as good as Vin. We'll see about that, won't we? Then there's an info burst box with the game's details, Rare are making it, 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, no controller pack needed but yes to expansion and rumble packs, no transfer pack. Anticipation rating is 5 red blobs, which is maxed out, naturally, whiles. On the right, there's a big advert for Cheats Unlimited, remember them? It's a phone cheat line for N64 games. They've got a massive list of games they supposedly have cheats for, everything from GoldenEye and Zelda, Ocarina of Time, to proper obscure stuff like Iggy's Wrecking Balls and Killer Instinct Gold. It's a right mixed bag. Loads of racing games and shooters, sports games, the whole shebang. Games like Star Wars, Rogue Squadron, Mario Kart 64, F-Zero X are there, classics really. They even list stuff like South Park and Superman, and even lesser known titles like Mischief Makers or Shadowgate 64. Proper long list, it goes on, listing games from A to Z, like 1080 snowboarding, all the way down to Yoshi's Story, and 0 Hour, Duke Nukem. Bit cheeky claiming cheats for everything, but you know what these mags were like? At the bottom it says, the above list is only a sample of what's on offer, and gives 2 phone numbers, one for under 16s, and one for 16 and over. Calls cost 60 pence a minute, blimey, that's a bit steep. They've even got a website, theatsunlimited.com, probably looks proper dodgy now. Good times though, ringing these lines for cheats when you were stuck. This page is all about Indie Racing 2000, Paradigm's new racing sim for the N64. They're calling it their first pick, so this is early day stuff for the magazine. It's all about oval racing, which is a bit of a US thing really, not quite the twisty circuits we're used to. In F1, the Q&A section kicks off asking how many tracks there are. Turns out there are 9 in total, including places like Indianapolis, Texas, Colorado, and even Orlando. Apparently, Texas and Colorado get 2 races each in the championship, making it 11 races in a season. Someone's asking if it's not as many as in F1 World Grand Prix, which is fair enough. They reckon oval racing is all about tiny steering adjustments to stay on the racing line between the other cars and those solid concrete walls. Sounds intense. Then there's the question about whether Americans love it, and of course they do, big audiences apparently. The reviewer reckons these races are tighter and more enclosed than F1 meetings, making for an electrifying atmosphere. Finally, they ask if the game will be exciting. Well, they reckon it would be brave to bet against it being better than NASCAR 99, as that was the only other oval racer on the N64 at the time. Paradigm's name gives them confidence it'll be a whole lot better than that. Looking at the screenshots, there's one with a waterfall in the background. Racing game developers do seem to love their waterfalls, don't they? Another caption says there will be up to 20 cars jostling, and another mentions the cars having a chunky Beetle adventure feel, which is a bit of an odd comparison. There's also talk of night and day, and varied weather conditions, which was always a nice touch back then. And apparently there's a draft bar to show when you're getting a boost from slipstreaming. Door. The info burst box confirms it's IR2K from Infogrames. It's a 128 megabits cart, which was decent size for back then, and it's 1 or 2 players. Controller, expansion and rumble packs are all supported but no transfer pack. Release-wise it was summer in the US but TBA for the UK and Japan, which is a bit of a pain. Anticipation rating is 3 red dots, so they are moderately interested, not exactly setting the world on fire just yet. This page features a preview of Hey You Pikachu. It was known as Pikachu Genki Dechu in Japan before we got our hands on it. Apparently it's all about talking to Pikachu, which was a bit of a novelty back then, wasn't it? You get this microphone thingy that plugs into the controller port, and the game's supposed to understand what you're saying. Sounds a bit hit and miss, to be honest. But they were pushing the boundaries with voice recognition in games at the time. The screenshots show Pikachu hanging out with other Pokemon like Bulbasaur and Oddish, going on adventures. Looks like you have to tell Pikachu what to do. They even ask if you can swear at Pikachu and get a reaction, which is typical magazine humor. Apparently, saying PlayStation in the Japanese version makes Pikachu sulk, which is a bit of a laugh. They reckon Nintendo will program in responses to real obscenities in our version. We'll see about that. Basse. They talk about good words to use, like apples, music and Zelda, which Pikachu supposedly loves. There's a Q&A section addressing things like how the voice recognition works, by magic, apparently, and whether Pikachu talks back. Yes, apparently you can have a proper conversation if you're fluent in Pika's own language, right? The info burst bit at the bottom says it's coming out in December in the US, but for us Brits, it's still TBA. Japan already got it. The anticipation rating is maxed out with 5 red balls, so people were clearly excited about talking to a virtual Pikachu. Whether it lived up to the hype is another question altogether, eh? This page is showing off a couple of upcoming games, Blues Brothers 2000 and Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. Blues Brothers 2000, well, it's trying to bring the Men in Black and White to the N64. Apparently the reviewer got an early copy and it sounds a bit rough around the edges, calling it a mediocre Mario clone with camera and control issues. They mention slow punching and dodgy collision detection, which doesn't sound great, does it? But they do say the song list is decent and the dancing bits are tricky, which sounds interesting, in a very 2000 kinda way. It's coming out in June, apparently in both the UK and US. Then we've got Hercules The Legendary Journeys, which is clearly riding on the back of the Xena TV show. Makes sense, I suppose, both were knocking about at the time. They're saying it's all Greek to us, bit cheesy that, but alright. Looks like you can switch between Hercules and his mates, Alice and Serena, a bit like Donkey Kong 64 with the character switching then. They're comparing it to Golden Axe and saying there's RPG bits too. Sounds like they're throwing everything into the mix to see what sticks. That's out in April, in the US and May over here. TLE. Looking at the screenshots, Blues Brothers has got one where you're guiding prisoners to a nurse in some weird asylum, and another of a dancing bit. Hercules is showing off a Cyclops. Aye, it's a Cyclops, oh dear. And another shot of Hercules doing his thing with lightning. Both from Titus by the looks of it. Seems like they were trying to get a bit of everything on the N64 back then. This page is all about a new RPG called Aiden Chronicles coming to the N64. Looks like THQ are publishing it, and it's supposed to be quite a big deal for RPG fans on the console. Given the lack of them really, they're calling it gorgeous looking, and reckon it's going to give Ogre Battle 64 feet and even Mother 3 feet a run for their money. Bit ambitious perhaps, but we'll see. It's described as a proper RPG, where you can have a band of 10 controllable characters, knights, wizards, the usual fantasy bunch. They're going for a non-linear storyline, which is always a nice idea, so apparently if you mess up you just go down a different path, with different quests and even a different ending. Sounds intriguing. Combat's turn-based, which is fine by me, and they're making a point about magical attacks. Apparently you get a bit of freedom to move around during battles to dodge attacks, which is a slight twist. They're saying it sounds a bit like Holy Magic Century, which wasn't exactly a classic, but they're confident H2O, the developers, will make it work. There's an info burst box with the usual stats. Cart size is 128 megabits, 1 player, controller and rumble packs are supported but no expansion pack. Release date is June for both the US and the UK, but Japan is TBA. They've given it a 4 out of 5 anticipation rating, so they're clearly quite hopeful. Then there's a section called An Ear to the Ground, which is basically gossip about other N64 games. Nintendo's E3 list is mentioned, and apparently there's a Pokemon game called Pokemon Attack coming to N64, but they think it might actually be a Game Boy Color game. Confusing. Mega Man 64 from Capcom is also on the list, which is apparently a conversion of Mega Man Legends from the PlayStation. Resident Evil 0 is there too, which is an N64 exclusive. Good to see Capcom supporting the machine. Rare apparently going to reveal a few things at E3 as well, including Banjo-Tooie, Mickey's Speedway USA, and footage of Conker's Bad Fur Day. They're wondering if Rare might finally announce Killer Instinct 3, which would be something. Factor 5, who did Rogue Squadron, are also mentioned as having 2 secret N64 projects, one of them being a Star Wars Episode 1 game. Jaw Instinct. Tony Hawk's Skateboarding 2 is mentioned, but apparently development has stopped, which is a shame if you were looking forward to more of that. But Neversoft are sticking with the N64 and are doing Spider-Man and X-Men, Mutant Academy for a 2000 release. The screenshots for Aiden Chronicles show some in-game action, with goblins, combat, and environments. One screenshot mentions mystic birds and axe-wielding combat, and another mentions random fights. Looks like a fairly standard fantasy RPG from the screenshots, but hopefully, it will be a decent addition to the N64 library. This page is an article from N64 Magazine, a special investigation no less, about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Ah, Turok, yes, good old dinosaur hunting. It seems Acclaim are the ones behind this one, and it's a whopping 256 megabit cartridge, which was pretty hefty back then. It supports up to 4 players, controller and rumble packs, but no Game Boy pack, which is fair enough. Looks like it was slated for a September release. Anticipation rating is 4 red blobs out of 5, so they were clearly looking forward to it. The article mentions the previous Turok is dead. Joshua Fireseed, poor sod. And this one's about his brother and sister, Joseph and Danielle. Sounds like the usual Turok fare. Dinosaurs, guns, and a whole load of violence, which is what you expect really. They even mention it's a massive game spread across, get this, 3 cartridges. Blimey, talk about epic. They're asking when dinosaurs will learn to stay extinct, which is a bit of a daft question when you're shooting them with rocket launchers, isn't it? But hey, that's Turok for you. Let the blood spilling commence. Bit dramatic, but it gets the point across. This page is all about Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, looking at what's considered fashionable in and out in gaming terms this year apparently. Under out, they're saying Joshua Fireseed, the main chap from the previous games, is out, because he kicks the bucket right at the start of Turok 3. Bit of a shocker that was. Jerky frame rates are also supposedly out, thank goodness, though Turok 2 did chug along a bit at times, didn't it? They also mentioned save points being out, which is a dig at Turok 2's save system being a bit spaced out. Apparently Turok 3 lets you save whenever from the pause menu, which is a welcome change. Then for the IN section, it's Danielle and Joseph, the 2 new playable characters, which is a cool idea, giving you different weapons and level areas depending on who you pick. Improved multiplayer is in too, and about time. Turok 2's multiplayer was a bit of a letdown after GoldenEye and Perfect Dark set the standard. They reckon Turok 3's multiplayer is much better, with bots as well, which is handy for solo practice or if your mates are rubbish. Finally, linear levels are apparently back in. Shadow of Oblivion is going back to the straightforward level design of the first Turok, which they say is more pleasing and less confusing than Turok 2's sprawling maps. I suppose sometimes you just want to know where you're going, eh? There's also a bit about the expansion pack. They're saying Turok 2 was the game that first used the expansion pack, and Turok 3 uses it again to double the resolution without making the game run slower, which is good going. Unlike Perfect Dark, which needed the pack for everything, apparently Turok 3 is fully playable without it, but looks better with it. Good on them for not forcing people to buy extra kit just to play the game properly. All in all, sounds like they're cautiously optimistic about Turok 3. Hoping it learns from the mistakes of Turok 2 and gets back to basics a bit. This page is all about the weapons in Turok 2, showing off the arsenal you had at your disposal. It's a classic N64 shooter, proper blast from the past this one. We've got the shotgun, reliable as ever. They say it's not as fancy as Perfect Dark's, which, yeah, fair point, Perfect Dark was pretty slick, but the Turok shotgun did the job of blowing dino heads off no problem. Then there's the silencer, bit of a sneaky pistol with infrared, Joseph's special weapon apparently for deliciously accurate aiming. Sounds a bit much, but okay. Next up is the sniper rifle, another Joseph exclusive, does what it says on the tin, get far away, and pop heads. Simple but effective. Then the fireswarm, a little fiery number that sets things alight. They say the initial explosion isn't the main thing, but the fire afterwards is nasty. Sounds about right, fire weapons are always fun. Boo! Below that is the shredder. Blue bolts that cause explosions and bounce off walls. Sounds a bit chaotic. Then the firestorm, which they call a minigun. Always good to have a minigun. They reckon it's back from Turok 2's weapons list, so a returning favourite, good stuff. Over on the right we've got the RPG, the classic rocket-propelled grenade, apparently back from the first Turok, and this time it can blow off limbs, lovely. Then the cerebral processor, Joseph's upgraded cerebral bore. Now that was a weapon. If it hit, you'd get to watch someone's head explode in slow motion for 10 seconds. Bit gruesome but brilliant at the time. Finally, the bow, they call it perfect for when you're tired of the explosive stuff. Bit more primitive but with sharpened steel blades in the arrows. Still packs a punch. A decent rundown of the Turok 2 weapons really. Takes me back. This page is an article from N64 Magazine called N64 Special Investigation, and it's all about the first mission of a game. Doesn't actually say the name straight away, but it becomes clear it's Turok 3. Right then, let's see what they reckon. Beauty. Section 1 kicks off at the top of a tall building, telling you to use the lift. Pretty standard start. Section 2, they mention a spidery enemy, and say a few pistol shots sorts him out. Noted. Section 3 is about going into the basement, where a friendly old man lives, who's supposed to help you through the dark tunnels. Sounds like a classic horror trope. Section 4, they say this friendly chap doesn't last long. Something nasty happens at the top of a ladder. They even show a picture of what's left. Bit grim, isn't it? Then in Section 5, they're onto big-headed monsters, and advise firing while running. Good advice for a Turok game. Section 6, escape route time. Friendly SWAT guys are blocking your way, but there's a hole in a wall to squeeze through. Section 7, underground cells, and Joshua, whoever he is, can crawl through small spaces to get to the exit. Section 8, back onto the streets, fire escape to rooftops, and more horrors lurking. Sounds like a typical level structure from a Turok game, starting indoors, going underground, then back outside. There's a bit at the bottom called the Lost Lands, which mentions Turok 3, Danielle and Joseph, going back to the Lost Lands from the first Turok game. Apparently, it's set 75 years after Joshua's first visit, so things are a bit different, tunnels instead of locked gates. They seem pleased that they found some secret areas from the original game, like a vine-covered wall, and the same stone structure that held the level 3 key back in the day. A bit of nostalgia for the old fans, I suppose. The page also mentions exploding scenery in Turok 2's first level, and how Turok 3 brings that back, with police hovercars crashing through walls. They're trying to hype up the action, as you'd expect. Overall, it's a guide to the first level of Turok 3, highlighting the different areas and enemies you'll encounter. Standard magazine preview stuff, really. This page is an N64 special investigation looking at Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion. Right then, another Turok game, eh? They're banging these out, aren't they? It's all about the visuals on this page. Reckons that Turok's patented fog has dissipated, which I suppose is a good thing. No one liked the fog in the early Turok games, really, did they? They're saying the levels are the best looking Turok levels yet, with a mix of fiery underground caverns, jungles, waterfalls and futuristic cityscapes. Sounds a bit like they're throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, doesn't it? Lucky. There are screenshots dotted about showing the game off. You can see some green-eyed kung fu fellas and what looks like a raptor, naturally. One caption is about green-eyed enemies with kung fu moves. Sounds a bit mental, doesn't it? Another one says the man on the right is a victim of zero policeman's tolerance policy, which I presume is a bit of humor about shooting everyone in sight. They're saying shooting scenery is possible, and there are clear fiery explosions. Right, explosions are always good, I suppose. The text talks about Acclaim developing the game and how they were up against the likes of GoldenEye and Perfect Dark. Big shoes to fill there, weren't they? They're saying the game is more linear and less bewilderingly complex than Turok 2, which probably means it's easier to figure out where you're supposed to be going. Taking a leaf out of Resident Evil 2's book apparently, with 2 characters to choose from, Danielle or Joseph Fireseed. Each character has different weapons and access to parts of the levels. They also mention upgradable weapons, which was becoming a bit of a thing by then. They reckon Turok 3 makes extensive use of its prequel's graphical engine, and that it's more satisfying and bloodier than ever. Raptors, skull-faced jungle natives, and indescribably ugly monsters are in the levels, apparently more intelligent but more vulnerable than their Turok 2 counterparts. Explosives can blow limbs off enemies, naturally. The reviewer seems to think Turok 3 is going to be good, a superb addition to the Turok series, but they're not convinced it will make the same impact as the earlier games, probably because Perfect Dark had already raised the bar a bit. They're promising a comprehensive look at the near-completed version of Shadow of Oblivion at E3 next month, so we'll have to wait and see if it lives up to the hype, won't we? The next page focuses on Turok 3, Shadow of Oblivion, and it's looking at the 2 playable characters, Joseph and Danielle, who are siblings apparently. The headline is, Brothers and Sisters, asking if you will choose Danielle or her teenage brother Joseph. They're pushing this decision thing, aren't they? It details their differences. Joseph is younger and smaller, making him more agile, able to squeeze into tight spots, which is a bit of a gameplay mechanic, I suppose. Danielle has a grapple hook, described as Acclaim's take on Link's hookshot from Ocarina of Time, letting her get to high places. Sounds a bit cheeky comparing it to Zelda, doesn't it? Jaya. Weapons-wise, they both get pistols and rifles, but they upgrade differently. Danielle gets a cerebral bore, upgraded to a cerebral burst, and Joseph's becomes the cerebral processor. Lovely. The looks section just points out they look different in first person, and the third person camera gives you a better view if you're worried about someone sneaking up on you. Standard stuff, really. There's a bit about multiplayer, saying it wasn't fully implemented in the version they played, but it's meant to have specially designed levels and up to 4 Rage Wars players. They list a few modes like Bloodlust, Capture the Flag, Golden Arrow, and Monkey Tag. Sounds like a standard multiplayer offering for the time, really, trying to cash in on that Perfect Dark hype. There's a sidebar called Secret Service talking about cheats. Apparently Turok 2's big cheat was famous, and they're still getting tips for it now, and Turok 3 codes are going to be symbol-based rather than alphanumeric, like eagles and skulls. Bit of a change from the usual button presses, isn't it? Expect invulnerability and level warps, and the usual silly cheats like big feet and mini-heads. Always good for a laugh, I suppose. This page is the front cover for Planet Game Boy. N64 Magazine must be branching out a bit then, eh? It's issue 17 from June 2000, and the big headline is DRIVER, shouting, Micro Machines meets GTA. Bit much, isn't it? For a Game Boy game anyway. There are a couple of American muscle cars on it, a bright red one in front, and a bluish one behind, looking like they're about to have a bit of a kerfuffle. Reviewed this issue, it says, pointing to a couple of games. IK2000 is on page 38, apparently boasting kung fu, giant afro hair and strange bonus games involving balls. Sounds quirky. And then G&W Gallery 3 feet on page 39 saying, it doesn't get any more retro than this little beauty. Yeah, Game & Watch. Proper old school, that is. Probably good for a bit of nostalgia, I suppose. Down the bottom left there's a win thing for a Game Boy Power Pack and wallet with your GB camera pics. Right, get snapping then. And at the bottom it says plus, and lists a few articles. Art class. Voyage to the bottom of Will's head. No idea what that's about. Tipped. Turok Rage Wars. Pokemon Pinball. So, a decent mix of stuff in there. From the looks of it. This page of Planet Game Boy kicks off with a welcome to Planet Game Boy bit, typical magazine intro stuff. They're talking about some of the latest games, mentioning Driver as a big release, which was pretty impressive on the Game Boy back then, felt like proper console stuff. They also mention Game & Watch Gallery 3, good for a bit of retro gaming, and Rayman and IK2K, decent platformers if you were into that sort of thing. They have a little moan about dodgy games flooding the market because of Pokemon's success, which was a fair point. There were some right stinkers trying to cash in. Then there's an article called Fodder Time about Cannon Fodder. Cannon Fodder on the Amiga was a classic, proper top-down action game, and they're saying this Game Boy version is like a faster Command & Conquer, but you only control a few soldiers. Sounds about right for the Game Boy. They're banging on about the control system and the levels ranging from jungles to frozen wastelands, with vehicles and all sorts. Apparently the Game Boy version is already looking good, with 72 levels, smooth scrolling, and even FMV, which was a bit of a novelty on the handheld. It's coming out in July, and they reckon they'll review it properly later. Below that is GCLUB Freebies, which is basically an advert for THQ's website for their Game Boy games. They're calling it the G Club, and you get tips, new release info, flash animations and all sorts if you sign up. They're promising a Rugrats comic, a dangly thing for your door, a card with your name on it, and a Gamster Game Boy wallet. Sounds like your typical publisher promotional guff to get kids hooked. You can see screenshots of the website with Rugrats plastered all over it, and a click here button. Very 2000. Finally, there's a snake thing about a light for your Game Boy called the Flexi Light from Blaze. They're saying even though the Game Boy screen isn't backlit, sometimes you need a bit of extra light, like on the tube or in a dark tunnel, to see what you're doing. This Flexi Light plugs into the side of the Game Boy and shines down. They reckon it doesn't drain the batteries too much, and it's got a flexible neck to angle it properly. They're even giving away 20 of them in a competition. Just gotta write in. It's got a picture of it plugged into a blue Game Boy color. Looks a bit like a snake, as they say. They reckon you could get some smart Game Boy camera effects with it if you're artistically inclined, whatever that means. Costs about £5. This page is a review for Driver on the Game Boy Color, and blimey, it got a stonking 5-star rating. A simply fantastic game, and an essential purchase, it says, which is pretty high praise back then for a handheld racer. They're saying you play as an undercover cop, but really, it's all about causing mayhem like a proper nutter. A bit like GTA but on the Game Boy. Remember all the controversy GTA caused with its pedestrians plattering antics? Driver was kinda riding that wave. They highlight the different driving game modes like Checkpoint, Getaway, Survival, and Pursuit. Sounds like plenty to keep you busy. The screenshots are classic top-down driving, very reminiscent of Micro Machines, which they even mention in the review, saying it combines the physics of Micro Machines with GTA-style environments. They reckon the handling is superb, which is always key for a racer on the Game Boy. Price-wise, it was £25 from GT, and it was out in June. Overall, the reviewer is absolutely buzzing about it, calling it unmissable and the best car game on the Game Boy. 5 stars, you can't argue with that, can you? This page features a couple of reviews, kicking off with International Karate 2000. Right, so this is Studio 3 dusting off an old classic, and they're saying it was a top beat-em-up back in the day, before Street Fighter 2 came along and changed everything. They're talking about the controls being a bit button-mashy, closer to Paper Scissors Stone than modern fighters, which sounds about right for the time. Apparently there are bonus rounds with bombs and balls to deflect, which is a bit of a laugh. The reviewer reckons it's still good fun, despite losing a fighter from the original, and they've given it a decent 4 out of 5 stars. The only real moan is no 2-player mode, which is a bit of a bummer really, especially for a fighter back then. Borington. Then there's Asterix from Infogrames. So they're imagining Mario in France as Asterix, which is a funny thought. They call it a basic platformer, like Speedy Gonzales, and you're collecting souvenirs for Caesar, using magic potions. The reviewer isn't too impressed with the story or humor, saying it's a bit identikit platforming. They've given it a 2 out of 5 stars, so not exactly setting the world on fire, but if you are into Asterix, maybe it's worth a look. They mention Obelix getting involved with some beery locals, which sounds like classic Asterix humor, and apparently Obelix can destroy blocks, which is handy. Overall, sounds like a bit of a mixed bag on this page then. This page has got a couple of Game Boy Color reviews. First up is Rayman. Remember Rayman? He was supposed to be Ubisoft's big mascot back then, before they went all rabbids mad. This is the Game Boy Color version, and they're saying it's a tricky platformer. Bit like Rayman 2, on the N64, which was indeed tough as nails. They reckon it's better suited to the Game Boy though, being 2D and all that. Sounds like classic Rayman, running around, whacking things, rescuing Electoons, that sort of thing. They mention the graphics are good for the Game Boy and it's got a nice retro feel. Gives it a solid 4 stars, so not bad for a handheld platformer. Then there's Game & Watch Gallery 3. Now this was a clever idea, bringing back those old brick Game & Watch machines but in color, on the Game Boy. This one's got 5 games to start with, apparently Egg, Greenhouse, Turtle Bridge, Mario Bros and Donkey Kong Jr. They've got both the classic black and white versions and then jazzed up modern versions with Mario characters in color. Donkey Kong Jr. is their favorite, saying it's like the arcade. They are rating this 4 stars too, saying it's simple but a good high-score challenge and you can save your game, which is handy for a handheld. They call it a retro fan's dream. Good way to get your old-school gaming fix on the go, I suppose. This page features the art class section, and it's all about being creative with your Game Boy camera. Remember those? Mad little gadgets they were. This article is titled Twisted Brain Solid, and it's about making a point-and-click adventure game using the Game Boy camera's features. Gee, yeah. Apparently, a bloke called Azadel Tas from Sweden sent in the idea. Basically, you take photos of different locations, doors, rooms and stuff, and then link them together with hotspots in the Game Boy camera software. So you can create a little interactive thing. They reckon it only takes about 20 minutes to set up, which sounds optimistic, knowing how fiddly those Game Boy cameras could be. There's a bit of a quiz question, asking if anyone other than Will and Mark remembers where she came from, offering a free pat on the back. No clue who she is from this page alone, mind you. There are example pictures showing how they've used it, with arrows linking different images together, including some dodgy-looking blokes' faces, a gun, and a Pikachu. They've even added text bubbles like, "Ta-da! Girls with big eyes," and "Bang!" It's all a bit daft really, but in a typically fun N64 Magazine way. They even mention adding sound effects to these hotspots. Cheeky! Basically, it's encouraging you to get creative and mess about with your Game Boy camera, which was always the best thing about it, to be fair. This page is all about tips and high scores for your Game Boy games, a bit of a nostalgia trip if you ask me. Kicking off with Game Boy Gallery 3, they're telling you to collect stars to unlock stuff, and if you score over 1000 points, you unlock star mode for a tougher challenge. Fair enough. Warrant! Then it's Turok. Rage Wars on the Game Boy, bless them. Passwords, eh? They've got a load for different levels on easy, medium and hard difficulties. Godless Mutha's bit strong for a games mag, even back then. But handy if you were stuck, I suppose. Wario Land 2 is next, with tips for that crafty platformer. Something about conveyor belts and stunning enemies. Sounds like typical Wario mayhem. And a tip for battling bosses. Finish the game at 100%, and you can fight them again by holding down an A when selecting a level with a skull. Cheeky. Pokemon Pinball gets a look in. Tips on boosting your score and filling your Pokédex, and something about a bigger cave bonus if you spell cave. Right then. Oh, and how to catch Zapdos on the red table in Lavender Town, making sure all the right-hand loop arrows are lit. Dedicated players, those Pokemon trainers. Right, after the tips, it's straight into the high scores. Pokemon Pinball scores for red and blue tables. Zamir Bandali seems to be dominating blue, Robbie Klein and Oscar Sheffick are up there for red too. Then Mario Deluxe scores, covering challenge and superplayer modes. James Holt and David Noble feature here. Tetris DX is up next with scores for 40 lines, Ultra, and Marathon at level 0 and level 9. Richard Ford seems to be all over the Tetris scores. That lad must have been glued to his Game Boy. Finally, it's Game & Watch Gallery scores for Donkey Kong, Parachute and Chef. Jonathan Den is top of Donkey Kong with a perfect 9,999 score. Show off. And right at the bottom, a little box telling you how to send in your scores to Planet Game Boy at N64 Magazine, if you reckon you're good enough to get featured. Good luck with that, plenty of competition back in the day. This page is all about the Game Boy camera, and a section called the Game Boy Gallery. It's showing off readers' pictures taken with the camera, and they are definitely on the weird side, just like they were always meant to be. The title is, Why Does It Always Rain Muties? Which is a bit of a strange one, but I suppose it fits with the kind of photos they've got here. It's essentially a collection of user-submitted photos, and they've picked out a winner this month, a Dave Marsland from Crew, who has made some sort of panorama portrait. They reckon it's absolutely superb, which might be a bit strong, but it's probably decent for a Game Boy camera shot. Then there are loads of other little photos dotted about, like Andy Scheuber in a painful, irradiated moment, whatever that means. There's Dave Fryer's closest encounter, Nick Lockwood's wildlife photography, and Lewis Reddington in a flattering pose, which looks like a right state. Richard Balaus is demonstrating the Game Boy's mirror lens feature. Looks a bit blurry though, typical Game Boy camera. There's a scene from the Pokemon Disco, apparently captured by Adam Worsdale, which seems to be some blurry figures. Simon Carradine from Bristol sent in something nasty, they think. Daryl Hayward has sent in a picture of a Game Boy plastic case. Cheers for that. Lee Fenton Wilkinson's photo is just described as, well, get you. War. No idea what that's about. War. Chris Nielsen from Glasgow has made a vaguely cool Pikachu mutation, which is probably just as weird as they say. Shigsy apparently has a copy of N64 Magazine hidden inside a jazz mag, which is a bit random. Ben from Chichester spotted a rabbity kind of Pokemon thing. Could be anything really. Daniel Mickelwright's photo is described as scary, and Theodoros Gagos has one that is freaky. Hang on a moment, it's real. And finally, someone is asking if a photo is of the robotic dog from Battlestar Galactica. Daggett, apparently. A right mixed bag of madness. Just what you expected from the Game Boy camera really, Warrantley. They are asking for readers to send in their freaks, and the monthly favorite wins a Game Boy Power Pack and wallet from Gamester, so you can keep your precious Game Boy safe and sound, and never have to buy batteries again apparently. You had to send your pictures to Planet Game Boy N64 Magazine at their address in Bath. This section was every month, only within the pages of N64 Magazine. So there you go, Game Boy camera madness in N64 Magazine. This page is the cover of N64 Arena Magazine issue 42. It's screaming the latest UK N64 games review. Clearly cut off there, but you get the gist. Dominating the page is Arena in big red letters. Main game being pushed is Perfect Dark, with a shot of Joanna Dark herself brandishing a weapon, and some gameplay screenshots with that classic objective failed message. Many will be familiar with that one. It's asking if Joanna's finally topped GoldenEye. Bold claim, back then GoldenEye was the king, so everyone was eager to see if Perfect Dark could dethrone it. There's a bit about a monstrous 16-page review, so they're really going in deep. Bottom right we've got Mario Party 2, with Yoshi dressed as a pirate, looking rather jolly, and a couple of screenshots from the game. 6 new boards, tons of new minigames it says, the most talked about party of the year. Mario Party was always a laugh with mates, so another one was always welcome. Then there's Kirby 64. The Crystal Shards, calling it Japan's going crazy for Kirby's particular brand of 2D platforming. Wondering what all the fuss is about. Kirby was always a bit of a different vibe on the N64, bit more cutesy, but still good fun. Hendogru. Finally, a little box for Import Arena, with US and Japanese flags, telling you to visit the Import Arena for games they're playing in America and Japan. Importing games back then, that was something else, wasn't it? Cost a bomb, but sometimes you got games way before they hit the UK, or sometimes they just never came out here at all. Good times. This page is all about how N64 Magazine reviews games. Bit cheeky, saying they're the best in the world. They've got this INFO burst section which is like a tech spec for games. They use a pretend game, Metroid 64 inches as an example, saying it's out in April, May and November depending on where you live, and costs 40 notes. Then there's pluses and minuses, and if you like this, bits, recommending Mickey Mouse 64 inches if you're into GoldenEye, or Turok 2, which is a bit of an odd comparison. They explain their scoring system. 85% and above is a star game, and below 19% is absolute wretched crud. Their words, not mine. Finally, they introduced TAM64, the reviewers, including Andrea Ball, Justin Webb, Mark Green, Martin Kitts, Darkmark, they like the name Darkmark, don't they? Paul Edwards, Neil Padot, Tony Segley, and Pikachu. Perfect Dark is Game of the Month for most of them, but Pikachu is backing Mario Party 2. This page is all about Perfect Dark. Blimey, wasn't that game hyped to the max back in the day? Massive 16-page review apparently, cause Rare had finally finished their masterpiece and according to them it was the biggest game of the year. Bit of a bold claim. Even back then. Joanna Dark herself is plastered all over the page, looking all futuristic and moody with her gun. They've even stuck in some little screenshots, probably to whet the appetite. And they're going on about a spoiler-free review, which is fair enough if you want people to actually buy the magazine before they play it themselves. Still, Perfect Dark, yeah, everyone was waiting for that one after GoldenEye, weren't they? High expectations is an understatement. This page is all about Perfect Dark finally. Remember all the hype surrounding this game? They've been previewing it for ages in this very mag since issue 17 apparently. It's like they're saying, at last it's here. And blimey, it really is. The article is titled, Perfect Dark, Joanna Dark. They're going on about how everyone's been drooling over screenshots and snippets of info. They say it was vaguely surreal seeing Perfect Dark being played in the office, with everyone gathered round like gaping admirers. Bit much, but yeah, it was a big deal. Biggest game in the world, they say. Fair enough. They even mention people staying up till 4 in the morning to play it, and dreaming about sneaking past guards. Sounds about right. They talk about team deathmatches after work, and being utterly besotted with it, like they were when they first opened a Twycross plain white package. Bit dramatic, lads. They mention a combined total of dozens of hours playtime, saying they haven't seen everything the game offers, and bet it'll be months before anyone can claim to have broken Perfect Dark. Bold claim. They also reckon Perfect Dark is up there with Mario, GoldenEye and Zelda. High praise indeed. They are saying it's worth £50, which was a fair wedge back then. There's an info burst section that says it's from Rare, Cart size is 256 megabits, 1 to 4 players, uses 28 pages on the controller pack, has cartridge save, rumble and transfer packs but not password save, which is a bit of a shame. Expansion packs are supported though, good stuff. Release dates listed are May 22nd in the US, June 30th in the UK and TBA in Japan, costing £50. Then there's the players section, with Joanna Dark, described as the agent, and Daniel Carrington, the boss. Joanna Dark is mentioned as a star graduate from Carrington Institute. Daniel Carrington is described as someone respected for his scientific career, and connected to extraterrestrial beings, founding the institute to reveal world leaders' presence. Bit of backstory for the game, I suppose. All in all, this page is basically saying Perfect Dark is the bee's knees and we should all be queuing up to buy it. And back then, we probably were. This page of N64 Magazine, June 2000 issue, is all about Perfect Dark in the N64 Arena section. It's giving us a rundown of some of the characters we'll be running into in the game. They're pointing out that the controls are practically the same as GoldenEye, which makes sense as everyone knew those controls inside out back then. Apparently they've tweaked it with secondary fire functions, and a new way to pick weapons, plus you can crawl now, which is a bit of a novelty. Then they introduce some of the faces. First up is Cassandra DeVries, labelled the bad girl, head honcho of Datadyne. Apparently she's so full of herself she stuck a massive D-Lay-D logo on her skyscraper. Subtle. Next is Dr. Carol, described as Sapient AI, a computer program who stumbled upon a crashed alien ship and a doomsday weapon, naturally. Then we have Mr. Blonde, the bad guy, a sinister fella in a white trench coat and shoes, which they reckon makes him fearless, and he's hiding something under his clothes. Intriguing. The Mayans are here as well. Benevolent Greys, who've been watching us humans for ages, and decided to step in and help. About time. And finally, the Skedar, Space Scourge, the ones responsible for cattle mutilations, charming, and apparently the enemies of the Mayans. They look like little lizards in robotic suits apparently. Blimey, Legay. Page 49, June 2000, so bang in the middle of the N64's prime. Good times. This page delves into the Carrington Institute from Perfect Dark, which is essentially your base of operations in the game. It's described as this sprawling place with fancy offices, a labyrinth of tunnels, and bunkers underground, hinting that you'll be spending a fair bit of time exploring it all. First up is the offices section, where you'll find Mr. Carrington himself. They mention that he's in his spacious office, and you can have a chat with him. The more you explore, the more secrets and surprises you'll find dotted around the place. Then there's the database, downstairs, where you can apparently access computer terminals to get background info on characters you've met during your missions. It shows a list of character profiles like Trent Easton, Cassandra DeVries, and even Elvis, which is a bit bonkers, isn't it? And it mentions that new profiles get added as you meet major characters in the game. Next is equipment training, which they liken to Bond's Q department. This is where you get to grips with all the gadgets. Each gadget has its own training mission in secret tunnels hidden behind walls, which sounds like a cool touch. Moving on to the basement, they describe it as cavernous hangars, where you can find vehicle technology, including a hoverbike, apparently a rare sight. There are also sentry guns mounted on the walls, reinforcing that this isn't just some playground, it's a serious spy agency. Combat training gets its own section in the Holo Training Center. If you're struggling with the controls, you head down there. They talk about going through the basics and even unarmed combat challenges, saying it'll test even GoldenEye experts cheeky. They list some of the Holo training levels like locking around and live combat, which seems pretty self-explanatory really. They even mention a stealth-focused mission, which is key to being a good agent naturally. There's a bit about crawling too, which Perfect Dark takes a step further than GoldenEye. Holding R and double-tapping bottom C lets you duck in 2 stages, eventually lying on your belly for proper crawling through small tunnels and steadying your aim when using zoom scopes. Sneaky! Finally, in a Rocky Pick section, they're raving about the weapon select wheel, calling it an homage to Turok 2. It's this circular menu that pops up when you hold A, letting you choose weapons by moving a cursor, instead of cycling through them like in GoldenEye. They make a point of saying you don't get shot to pieces while waiting for the menu to appear, which is a definite improvement. Fair play. This page is all about weapons training in Perfect Dark, good old Joanna Dark. It's showing off the weapons you can mess around with in the training areas, so you can get to grips with them before you head into the proper missions. They've got the Falcon 2 pistol, which is basically your standard James Bond style PP7, a reliable workhorse. Then there's the Magsec 4, fires in bursts, a bit more punch than the Falcon. The CMP 150, a standard machine gun, nothing too fancy but does the job. Ah, the laptop gun, that was a clever one. Disguised as a laptop but pops out as a sentry gun. Very perfect dark, very spy-fi. The RCP-120, rapid fire, and it cloaks you, sneaky stuff. Super Dragon, like the dragon but with grenades, for when you want to make a bigger bang. The Reaper, wildly inaccurate apparently but fires a ton of shots, good for close quarters chaos. Rocket launcher, standard rocket launcher really, point and shoot and things go boom. And finally the Callisto NTG, a Mayan weapon, quick firing. They are all good fun to play with, each has its own uses, that's for sure. There's also a bit about the cutscenes in Perfect Dark, saying how many there are and how good they look, especially that Area 51 one. Back then, for an N64 game, they were pretty impressive to be fair, a step up from GoldenEye's blocky figures. They even mention you can watch them back at the Carrington Institute, which was a nice touch, reliving the story. 30 minutes of cutscenes in total on the cart, they were proud of squeezing all that in, and rightly so. This page from N64 Magazine looks like it's diving into the solo missions of Perfect Dark. Right at the top it's talking about cheats, saying Perfect Dark is more generous than GoldenEye, with dishing them out just for completing levels, and even more if you've got the Game Boy version and transfer pack. Remember that, Faf? To get the really good stuff though, you have to complete levels within time limits. Typical. Moving on to the main chunk, it's all about the solo missions. Apparently there are 17 levels spread across 9 missions in total. They're boasting about how much bigger the levels are than in GoldenEye, which was a pretty big deal at the time. They've broken down the first 3 missions here. Mission 1 is Datadyne, with 3 components. It's about rescuing Dr. Carroll from Datadyne and getting intel. Sounds like a standard infiltration job. Getting in via the roof, disabling security, and rescuing the hostage. There's a note about a helicopter attack on secret agent difficulty, and above always makes things a bit spicy, doesn't it? And another note to not kill the scientists, just knock them out, which was a bit of a novelty back then, non-lethal takedowns. Mission 2 is Carrington Villa, only 1 component for this one. This is a rescue mission too, this time it's Mr. Carrington himself being held hostage. Sounds like Joanna Dark is providing a diversion while a negotiator does his thing, then you've got to kill snipers and get the power back on. There's a little comment about multiple entry points. They were pretty proud of the level design in this game, and a mention of a fierce shootout in Carrington's cellar. Bet that was a right old Barney. Mission 3 is Chicago G5 building, with 2 components. This one's about the G5 Corporation and stealing mission equipment. You're sneaking in via sewers, avoiding civilians, disarming security grids, and using a cam spy to record evidence of a meeting and grabbing data from the boardroom safe. A note saying Chicago is a seedy place in Joanna's world. A bit dramatic, aren't we? And finally, a mention that the G5 defense troops have cloaking devices, making them tough to hit. That's just showing off now, rareware. Below all the mission info there's a gameplay box listing some cheats and how to unlock them. Invincible for completing Area 51, escape on agent in under 3 minutes 50, and a cloaking device cheat for completing G5 reconnaissance on agent in under 1 minute 40. They were proper sticklers for time limits, weren't they? Wards. And down the side a fun section with more cheats, DK mode, Small Joe, small characters, team heads only, play as Elvis, and slow-mo single player. All unlocked by completing specific levels at certain difficulties. Good bit of extra content if you could manage it. This page covers mission briefings for Perfect Dark, still looking pretty swish even now, eh? Mission 4, Area 51, is all about rescuing a Mayan bodyguard from the famous secret base. Apparently well-placed grenades are your friend against snipers, and the twin mag secs are the weapon of choice. Good to know Elvis is making appearances throughout the game, seems he's your pal. Stealth is key, which makes sense. Mission 5 moves on to Air Force 1, where you're after evidence from the G5 building. Seems Datadyne are up to no good, shocker. This time, the stewardess and her bodyguards are innocent, so no need to go postal on them. There's a funny line about a president with a goatee. Definitely not the done thing in this lifetime apparently. Trent and his white-suited chaps are the bad guys here, naturally. Elvis again is the man to see if things go south. Definitely not. Mission 6 takes us to Pelagic 2, a deep-sea research vessel. Datadyne again, those pesky blighters. You need to disable the ship and get to the downed Cetan craft. The X-ray scanner is apparently the solution for some puzzle. And a bit of a cheeky tip about Joel turning her pistol sideways when you get close to enemies, for that gangster style. Charming. You can interrupt reload animations too, apparently, which might be handy. Cheeky to you. Down the right side we've got the N64 Arena section, listing unlockables, Queensbury rules, Joe's shield, super shield, enemy shields, enemy rockets and perfect darkness. All level completion based unlocks for the arena mode, each with a little flavor text. Then there's solo weapons, telling you how to get the rocket launcher, sniper rifle and super dragon, again, level completions. Laptop gun and phoenix are also listed as unlockables. Standard stuff for extra weapons in games back then, wasn't it? June 2000, issue 53. Time flies, eh? The next page showcases the N64 arena section. This one's all about Perfect Dark, naturally. They're running through some of the unlockable weapons and mods you could get in the game. Classic stuff for rare games back then, hidden extras and secrets galore. First up, the Psychosis gun. Unlocked by completing Chicago's Stealth on Perfect Agent. Remember that one? Bit of a sneaky level. Then there's Trent's Magnum for finishing Crash Site. Confrontation on Agent in under 2 minutes 50 seconds. Good luck with that if you're not using the Falcon 2. Farsight is in there for Deep Sea. Nullify Threat on Perfect Agent in under 7 minutes 27 seconds. That level was a pain, all those underwater bits. And GoldenEye guns for winning gold medals at the firing range. Standard stuff, show off your aiming skills. Then on to weapons mods. Classic sight you got for Datadyne Central Defection, remember that one? Laptop sentry gun ammo from Air Force One. Anti-terrorism on Perfect Agent under 3 minutes 55 seconds, a useful little gadget that. Hurricane Fists unlocked with Datadyne Central Extraction on Agent in under 2 minutes 3 seconds, bet that was a tricky time trial. Unlimited ammo from Pelagic 2. Exploration on Special Agent under 7 minutes 7 seconds, always handy that. No reloads from Airbase, Espionage on Special Agent in under 3 minutes 11 seconds, a bit of a challenge that one. And finally, X-ray scanner from Area 51, Rescue. They really made you work for these goodies, didn't they? Moving on to the mission walkthroughs. Mission 7 is Carrington Institute, which is the first level essentially. They point out it's a surprise Skedar attack during a formal party. The tip is about the CI staff being helpful. Well, some of them were, some of them just got in the way. Mission 8 is Attack Ship, where you're captured. Apparently Elvis, the Mayan, can make sense of the 3D star map. Typical alien logic. And lastly, Mission 9 is Skedar Ruins. They mention the Skedar below have Slayer missiles, so time to run. And a warning about the critters lunging at you before they die for one last swipe. Good to know. Pretty standard walkthrough fare, but helpful enough if you were stuck. This page showcases the cool gadgets you could get your hands on in Perfect Dark, which, let's be honest, were half the fun. It's titled, Get Equipped, and it talks about how no self-respecting secret agent would go on a mission without some decent tech. They're bang on, you needed all the help you could get in that game. Worry, it runs through a bunch of gadgets, starting with the Drug Spy, which was basically a remote spy camera to eavesdrop on people. Then there's the X-ray scanner, a short-range farsight showing guards and hidden bits through walls. The data uplink is for hacking computers, proper technobabble stuff. Night vision, as you'd expect, for seeing in the dark. And the IR scanner, a bit like night vision but for heat, useful for seeing through smoke and stuff. The disguise gadget lets you blend in, always handy for sneaking about. On the right side, it mentions the RT tracker, a tracking device, the ECM mine, an electronic countermeasure, probably to jam signals, and the door decoder for picking electronic locks. Each gadget has a screenshot showing it in action. Door. Then there's a section on cheat unlocks. You could unlock stuff like the RT tracker, all guns, and buddies. Buddies unlocks the pugilist, hotshot, hit and run, and alien cheats. These are all tied to completing certain missions in Perfect Dark, on Perfect Agent difficulty, under specific times. Things like completing Skedar Ruins, Battle Shrine for the RT tracker and all guns, Datadyne Research, Investigation for Pugilist, Area 51, Infiltration for Hotshot, Carrington Villa, Hostage 1 for Hit and Run, and Attack Ship, Covert Assault for Alien. Getting Perfect Agent on some of those missions was a proper challenge, let me tell you. But unlocking these extras was definitely worth bragging rights. It's a good rundown of the gadgets, and some tasty unlockables to aim for in Perfect Dark. The next page in N64 Magazine is all about multiplayer in Perfect Dark, and blimey, they are going on about the detail Rare put into it, customizing everything down to team names and weapon lists, which was pretty impressive back then. There's a bit at the top called Stop It, where they are having a right moan about spelling Datadyne with a capital D. Apparently in the game it's lowercase Datadyne, and this really gets their goat, comparing it to Wipeout. Bit dramatic, but hey, magazine filler, eh? Then they dive into best gear for multiplayer. First up is the Slayer, that Skedar fly-by-wire rocket. It was a right laugh chasing people down corridors with that, or just being a scout. They reckon the Sims are Slayer masters. Good luck to 'em. Next, the farsight, the ultimate camping weapon they call it. Point it in the general direction, use the radar, and see through walls. Instant death. Cheeky, but effective, you had to admit. Record. Then there's the N-bomb. Oh yeah, the N-bomb. Friends will fear you, apparently. Drops weapons, staggers victims, blurs vision. Not a pretty sight, they say. Bit grim, but true enough. Atu. Yi. Finally for gear. Combat boost. Using a combat boost puts you and everyone else into slow motion. A new approach to aiming and dodging. They reckon the warping effect is amazing. Yeah, it was quite something. Messing with time like that. Poor ye. Moving on to best places, they highlight 4 maps. Ravine is first. Fantastic for Slayer and Farsight action. Wide open spaces, multiple levels, climbable pipe, moving lift. Sounds like a decent arena. Warranters. Then Villa, based on Daniel Carrington's Villa. Open spaces, sandy tunnel connecting the areas. They reckon King of the Hill is good here, but the Sims will thrash you. Cheeky Sims, always up for a fight. Warehouse is next. Flatter levels, plenty of tunnels, good for ambushes and close combat. Ideal for epic battles against deadly Sims. Bring them on, they say. Bit cocky, aren't they? Rigged. Last map is Area 52, probably the best all-round arena. Apart from the GoldenEye levels, it's one of the easiest to learn, with good spots, final stand and automatic doors. So your standard solid map then. So that's the multiplayer rundown, gear and maps they liked. All good stuff for a blast with your mates, or against those crafty Sims back in the day. The next page is all about Perfect Dark Arena. Seems they're really pushing this combat sim aspect of Perfect Dark, enter. First up they're talking about best Sims. The AI characters you'll be fighting, or alongside. There's the normal sim, just your average Joe. Then the prey sim who's after weapons. Feud sim is a right pain, targets one player specifically. And then Shigsy, who isn't actually a sim type but you can stick his face on any of them. Apparently they had a right laugh playing against a team of Shigsies on the Ravine map, getting murdered by Slayers. Sounds about right for Perfect Dark. Next section is Challenge This, going on about the 30 combat challenges in the game, ranging from easy to properly tough. They mention you can play with up to 3 mates, and the more human players, the more Sims you have to face. Apparently by Challenge 20, the Sims are properly brutal, especially the Slayer and Devastator types. They list a few challenges. Challenge 4 is KOTH, on Skedar. Sounds like King of the Hill mode to me. Difficulty 1, seems easy enough. Challenge 9 is Combat on Ravine. Difficulty 2, with one-shot kills using the Farsight. Now that's a bit tasty. Challenge 15 is Briefcase on Grid. Difficulty 4. Like GoldenEye's flag mode, they reckon Devastator weapon is the weapon of choice which the Sims use constantly, probably meaning they spam it. Challenge 20 is Popper Cap on Sewers. Difficulty 5. You've got to protect a designated target in this scenario, and if the enemy Sims see you before you see them, you're dead. They're really selling the difficulty, aren't they? Then there's more, talking about 2-player modes. Coop mode lets you team up in the solo missions, which could be a laugh. If one player dies, they respawn at the start of the level. You can also play Coop with Sims if you're rubbish. Apparently you can choose Joanna, her sister Velvet, and other Sims as cheats. Counter-op mode is where one player controls Joanna, and the other controls the enemy, the entire enemy force, which sounds a bit unbalanced if you ask me. They reckon it's more of a novelty than anything. Best in agent mode, where enemies die from a single shot, which makes sense in the lesser difficulty levels. There's a bit about the expansion pack, saying if you don't have one you're not completely out of luck. You need one for solo, co-op or 4-player, but a limited 2-player mode is available without it. You can still play challenges, and the normal combat sim in letterbox format. Basically, get an expansion pack if you want the full experience, which we all knew anyway back then. Warrington. Finally, new intro bit says after completing the game on agent mode, you get a new intro movie. They call it a funky Perfect Dark light show, and reckon it's very cool, especially on a big telly in the dark. Big logo scrolling, ambient music, Jeff Minter-style plasma effects, all very Amiga demo scene apparently. Bit nostalgic of them. Chesho. Bottom right is the usual Nintendo 64 product info box, mentioning product ID, product code, retail price, dev, and distributor, all the usual details for Perfect Dark. This page is all about cheat tactics and game guides, proper old school stuff. At the top there's a section called Protect and Survive, for Area 51. Escape. Looks like a mission walkthrough. You're meeting up with Jonathan from the Carrington Institute. Cheeky nod to GoldenEye 007 there, eh? And you're trying to get out of Area 51. Apparently his cover's blown and he's the only one who knows the way out. Sounds like a right pickle. Sucker. The guide goes through blowing up walls with charges, which is always a laugh. They mention using the Super Dragon's grenade launcher to save the day when you get ambushed. Classic over-the-top action. Then you've got to use more charges to blast through to the hangar, and apparently meet Elvis again at the end. Elvis! Madness! Then underneath is foul play, for Pelagic 2, exploration. The tagline is, you're outnumbered by hundreds to one, so nobody's gonna blame you for playing dirty. Sums it up really. It's all about using dirty tricks because you are proper swamped with enemies. They mention using the N-bomb to stun guards, making them drop their guns and wander around like zombies. Mental. Then you can mop them up with the laptop gun, which is apparently your friend Mr. Laptop. A bit of a weird name, but each to their own. Sounds like you're really meant to take advantage of the gadgets and be sneaky, which is fair enough when you're that outnumbered. In the side bits there's Timer to Die, which talks about using a mission timer in GoldenEye 007 to help with cheats. Remember trying to get those cheat unlocks? Proper fiddly business. This timer idea sounds alright for knowing if you're on track or completely wasting your time. Then there's Jump Around about jumping features in games. Apparently, Future Perfect sounds a bit sci-fi, had jumping and dropping from ledges. Says it's like a Turok style jump, which was always good for getting around. Useful for multiplayer apparently, cutting corners and all that. Yeah, fair enough. All pretty standard stuff for action games back then really. This page delves into Perfect Dark, showing off some of the cheeky bits they've crammed in. First up, there's a bonus mission 1, which is a reward for completing the main game. Apparently, after 17 levels of Joanna being a right menace, you get to play as Mr. Blonde in Mr. Blonde's Revenge. It's a bit of a role reversal, with all the enemies being female this time, trying to restore the gender status quo, whatever that's supposed to mean. You're strolling into the Datadyne building with a cloak and a bomb spy, causing havoc on anyone who dares to cross you. They mention there's 2 more bonus missions to find as well. Then we get into the killing spree section, warning us it might be a bit much if you're squeamish. Bloodbath is highlighted, saying it's like a Jackson Pollock painting, bit dramatic in it. Apparently you can knee the dead guys to see the splatter. Charming. Safety First reminds us to pop an extra cap in downed enemies, just to be safe. And Man Mountain, well that's just stacking bodies on top of each other. They seem quite proud of the ragdoll physics. Light Fantastic is next, and this is about the real-time lighting they were banging on about. Apparently it was a top request from readers. Fully lit means you get dazzling coronas around lights, which look great but might mess up your aim. Partially lit lights can be shot out, flickering for a bit before going completely dark. Bit of a novelty I suppose. And unlit areas are just pitch black, needing night vision goggles, or the IR scanner. They even give a tip about remembering to take the goggles off, on level 3, otherwise the guards will try to blind you. Very helpful. Kier. Lastly, there's a bit about high-res mode. They're acting all surprised that Rare bothered to put one in, calling it an acclaim-style feature. A bit snarky that. Apparently, it's a bonus option from the pause menu, and makes the graphics look crisper. They admit it hits the frame rate in bigger areas or fights, so they prefer to play in standard resolution. They point out all the screenshots in the magazine so far were taken at normal resolution anyway. Fair enough. This page from N64 Magazine's Arena section is all about Perfect Dark. Right then, you've got Joanna Dark herself plastered on the page, looking rather sharp, pistol in hand of course. They're digging into the story unlock feature, saying if you're confused by the plot after finishing the game on Agent Mode, you can read the full story on terminals at the Institute. Apparently, Agent Mode is a bit of a stripped-down version. There are boxes highlighting bits from the gameplay, things like the high body count, which they reckon is ridiculous and super violent. No surprises there for an N64 shooter in this day and age. They found the alien autopsy lab in Area 51, which is classic Perfect Dark, isn't it? Then there's a shout out to the hoverbike, saying it's fun but a shame you can't run people down. Typical gamer humor. They also point out the laptop gun reloading and nerve gas sections, and even the Skadar warriors getting taken down by Hot Lead. The reviewer seems well impressed by the detail in Perfect Dark, talking about the rooms and scenery, the Datadyne skyscraper with floors you might never even see, filled with desks and coffee rooms, and off-duty guards just hanging about. It's all about how much Rare put into it, and the character animation too. The lifespan box is a big 5 out of 5, so it's a top score then. The headline, because it's so tough, there are certain arenas and characters some players will never see, is about the game's difficulty, saying that even experts on GoldenEye, like themselves apparently, had to drop the difficulty down after getting beat. They were thinking they were hotshots, but Perfect Dark soon put them in their place. They reckon some players might miss loads of details because they'll be too busy trying not to get shot. Things like enemy reactions, like spinning around wildly, running for help yelling, guns jamming, and even surrendering with lines like, "I was just doing my job." They say these details are amazing, but you might miss them, because you'll be too busy trying to survive. It's all about how much depth they crammed in, even if you're likely to be too busy to notice half of it when you're playing. This page is a review of Perfect Dark Arena for the N64, and blimey, they've given it a stonking 96%. It's called N64 Arena at the top. Big and bold. They're saying it's technically stunning, got ingenious missions, endless multiplayer options, and is hugely entertaining, all plus points in their little yellow box. Then there's a minus point. Too difficult for some? They ask with a question mark, almost apologetically. Sounds like they're struggling to find fault, bless 'em. They're comparing it to GoldenEye, naturally, saying if you liked that and who didn't back then, you'll love this. They reckon GoldenEye was the world's second best first-person game, so that sets the bar high. Visually they're raving about huge levels, real-time lighting, eye-popping animations and loads of blood, classic N64 over-the-top stuff. Sounds are getting a 10 out of 10 too. Some of Rare's best music to date, and terrific surround sound effects apparently. Mastery gets a 9, saying all the development time was well spent, calling it smooth, fast and lovely. Lifespan also gets a 10, saying it's the biggest game in the world and you'll be playing it for years. Big words. There's bits of text dotted around images of the game like, there are lots of enemies with tranquilizer guns around here. Sneaky. Another one says, a journey to the bottom of the sea. Things are starting to get very strange, intriguing stuff. Take out the sentry guns, just like in that other Rare game. Cheeky nod to GoldenEye again, I reckon. And another one says, this game has got absolutely everything you could wish for. Don't miss it, and the Skadar are capable of taking half of your energy bar with a single swipe. Sounds like a right challenge. Oh, and a delightful little quote. Kneel and beg for your life, worthless Datadyne lackey. Always good to have some proper villainous taunts. Down below they're talking about how every character has something to say, even if it's just a death shriek or a choked gurgle. Bit gruesome, but hey, it's Perfect Dark. They mention the realistic environments, the multiplayer, the Turok-style aliens that some people weren't too happy about, and the Skadar Ruins level being a highlight. They also touch on cheat codes and stat tracking, which is always a good addition. Seems like Martin Kitts gave it this glowing review, dated June 2000. Pretty solid score, and reading it now it brings back memories of arguing with mates about whether this or GoldenEye was better. Good times. This page is all about Mario Party 2, blimey that takes me back. It's got an info burst section on the left, giving you the nitty-gritty details like it's a 128 megabit cart, 1 to 4 players, needs a controller pack to save your progress cartridge, save is a tick though, passwords and expansion pack are a no-go, rumble pack is yes and transfer pack is no. Coming out now in the US and Japan and June 2nd for us here in the UK, costing a hefty £45, mind you games were pricey back then. They're saying Nintendo were a bit surprised by how well the first Mario Party did, a digital board game with loads of mini-games. Apparently it sold well when it came out in April, and they even had to apologize to shops for underestimating how many people wanted it. There's a mention of those American lawsuits about the analog sticks, and how Nintendo had to give away gloves to stop people's hands getting sore. Remember that palaver? They are wondering if this sequel will do as well, especially with all the hype around Perfect Dark at the time. Will it be overshadowed? Seems like they are about to find out. There are some screenshots showing off the game, bits of board game action, a rolling drum minigame, something with boats, Mario and Luigi chopping wood, a musical minigame and one of those item minigames with Baby Bowser as the, booby prize apparently, and a little jokey caption about Mario being able to do everything, plumbing, golf, Skittles. Cheeky. This page is all about Mario Party 2, blimey, already on to the sequel. They're calling it Treading the Boards, and going over some of the event tiles you'll find on the boards. They mention the question mark tiles on Pirate Land, saying they'll cause chaos, which is putting it mildly. Those things could ruin your entire game. Then there's Chance Time. They're calling it a fruit machine sub-game where you can nick stars or coins off your mates, or they can do the same to you. Sod's law, it's always you losing stuff, isn't it? There's a genie event as well, apparently from Aladdin's cave. It sounds like you'll drag someone around the board and then dump them near Toad. Right then. And Bowser's got his own square, naturally. Landing on that means he'll either steal your coins or unleash his baby brother to cause havoc, knocking people back to the start. Lovely, right. They've got a little section called Coining It, which is a bit cheeky, revealing a cheat to get loads of coins. Apparently if you play a really long 60-turn game against the computer, then mess about in the pause menu, you can switch control to player 1 and basically rinse the computer for all its coins. A bit of a faff, but if you're desperate for the shiny stuff I suppose. Yapey. Then it moves on to Games World and Minigame Land. They're saying they've ditched the shop island from the first Mario Party and made it easier to get to the minigames. You can buy them from this tree called Woody, of all things, and then play them whenever you fancy. They mention battle, adventure, and stadium modes are still in there if you don't fancy the main board game. There's a spin match minigame shown in a screenshot, looks like some sort of slot machine thing. And yeah, they mention Peach's voice when she wins a minigame is like nails on a chalkboard, which is absolutely spot on. Grating isn't the word. Good old piranha plants get a mention too, lurking about. Sounds like typical Mario Party madness then, just what you'd expect. This page in N64 Magazine is having a look at Mario Party 2, focusing on the minigames. They're calling it Let the Games Begin, which is a bit of a dramatic headline for a party game, but there you go, okay. They're showcasing 4 types of minigames. First up is Bumper Balloons, which sounds like a classic chaotic multiplayer affair where you bounce opponents into the sea, typical Mario Party madness. Then there's Saber Swipes, a dual minigame about button presses and stealing coins. Sounds like a bit of frantic fun against your mates. Give Me a Break is next. Something about alternating hands on the controller and stealing items, probably one of those slightly odd minigames that are a laugh after a few pints. Finally, Bumper Balloon Cars is a battle minigame, basically Mario Kart battle mode, but in Mario Party can't go wrong with a bit of that. Gat-bat. They also briefly mention counting wandering boosts and point out hidden blocks with coins, standard Mario Party fare really. The review reckons the minigames are the main draw, saying they're more exciting than the board game sections, which is probably fair enough. The boards are alright, but the minigames are where the real action is. Apparently there are over 60 minigames in Mario Party 2, which is a load. They reckon half of them are brand new, and call it gloriously unsophisticated fun, which sums up Mario Party pretty well. They're even comparing Nintendo and HAL to Lennon and McCartney. Bit strong that, but they're clearly impressed. They mention some simple minigames like Sneak and Score, Shy Guy Says, which is like Simon Says, and Roll Call. Oh, and apparently if you beat Bowser on 5 boards you get a secret 6th map. A bit of a bonus for the completionists. This page is an article titled, The Pain, from N64 Arena. It's all about Mario Party 2. They're joking about the first Mario Party causing injuries with all that analog stick spinning, and thankfully they've toned it down a bit for this one, going back to track and field style button bashing instead. Apparently they've already hurt their index finger playing it, trying to beat some 36-meter distance in a minigame, which sounds like a challenge. The article mentions the game stays true to Mario's heritage, except for the archery game, and the characters get special costumes for each board. They even point out Yoshi looking cute in a cowboy suit, bless him, Yolty. There are little captions under screenshots. One mentions Baby Bowser is back, the little tyke. Another says if you can beat their 36-meter distance, write in, they won't believe you, cheeky. Another one is about a hammer at point A and escaping Mario's clutches, and there's one about leaning the wrong way in the minecart race which can tip you off the track. The penguin relay race is mentioned as being an absolute hoot, unless you're losing of course. They've got a pluses and minuses box. Pluses are 60 marvellous minigames, stuffed with secrets, multiplayer larks to rival Mario Kart, and nothing else like it on the N64. Minuses are, part from the very similar original, and don't try it alone. Fair points really. There's an If You Like This section recommending the original Mario Party, saying, get your free gloves out for the similar but less enjoyable prequel. A bit of a dig there. It got 85% in their review back then. Then there's the review scores down the side. In a section called Visuals, they give it an 8, saying the colourful Mario universe is brought vibrantly to life again. Sounds get a 7, for top tunes, and the usual pained yelps of Mario & Co. Mastery is a 7, saying it's hardly pushing the envelope, but what other console does 4-player so well? Lifespan gets an 8, saying with one controller it's ages, and with up to 3 friends, ages too. The verdict section at the bottom says it's £45, which is a lot for a game that's only fun with mates, but it's brilliant fun and a unique Nintendo experience, giving it an overall score of 87%. The reviewer, Mark Green, calls it a hell of a party. Pretty positive overall, seems like they enjoyed it, even with the potential finger injuries. It was June 2000 when this was published, so right in the N64's twilight years, as the PlayStation 2 was looming, but still plenty of life left in the old grey box. This page from Import Arena in N64 Magazine is all about imported games, naturally. It kicks off with the usual flags, Japanese and American, telling us these games are from those regions. They're reviewing games not yet out in the UK, which was always exciting back then. The main feature here is Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. Looks like they're pretty impressed with it. They mention the Air Ride game was cancelled, which is a bit of a downer even now, but Kirby's back in his platforming roots. The screenshots show classic Kirby gameplay, throwing enemies, vertically scrolling sections which could be a bit tough, and some colourful backgrounds. They even mention that the halfway bosses are easy, bragging about polishing them off in seconds. Typical reviewer bravado, eh? The info burst box gives us the techie bits. 128 megabit cart size, 1 to 4 players, no controller pack needed, and it's out now, having been released on June 26th, costing around £35, which was standard for imports at the time. The How Very Sweet section seems to gush a bit about how cute the game is, with heartbreaking enemies and bosses that jump for joy when you beat them. Stranded fish flapping about is mentioned too, and the bonus games after each level where Kirby's friends laugh. They finish off by saying the cutscene animations are brilliant, which to be fair they were for the time. Overall, sounds like they really liked Kirby 64, and rightly so. It was a decent game. This page is showcasing Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, and it's got a section called Eat and Be Happy, which is a 6-step guide to Kirby's main abilities. It walks you through how Kirby sucks up enemies, uses them as weapons, swallows them to get abilities, and even combines abilities. It's pretty basic stuff if you've ever played a Kirby game, but I suppose for newcomers back then it was a good intro. They even show how bomb plus rock equals dynamite, which is a neat combo. Pretty. Then there's a review piece on Kirby 64 itself. The reviewer reckons it looks lovely and controls well, but then immediately slates it as dull, and says it's aimed at younger N64 owners, which is a bit cheeky. They go on about how it needs more innovative moments, and that the level design is bland, even if the early levels are alright, and the ability mixing is a cool idea. They mention boomerangs, icy breath, and fireballs as examples of standard moves, and say combining them unlocks new stuff. Bit harsh really. I remember enjoying Kirby 64 back then. It was a solid platformer, even if it wasn't the most groundbreaking game on the system. They also make a point of mentioning that Kirby's Air Ride was cancelled, which was a shame, and that Kirby 64 was selling really well, even beating Ridge Racer V on the PlayStation 2 in Japan. So, popular but apparently a bit rubbish according to this reviewer. Always someone trying to be clever, aren't there? This page is all about the pick-up and mix abilities in Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, which were a pretty neat feature back then. It's focusing on some of the best dual-type abilities you could create. First up is the firework ability, which is a mix of fire and bomb, creating these explosive fireworks. They say it's their favorite mixed ability, and I can see why. It looked quite impressive for the time, making baddies explode in a shower of sparks. Then there's the Swiss Army knife, which is made by combining 2 cutter abilities. This gives Kirby a whole bunch of sharp objects to use, like knives and corkscrews. They even mention sharpened pencils, which sounds a bit daft, but hey, it's Kirby. Apparently you can double up on the spike move with this, which is probably useful. Ooh. Next is Snowman. This one's a mix of snow and bomb. They say it's rare to find the snow ability in Kirby 64, which is true actually, it wasn't everywhere. But if you mixed it with bomb, you gotta walk around as a snowman and launch bombs from your head. A bit silly, but fun. Finally, there's Double Lightsaber, which is a combination of boomerang and cutter. They're having a laugh about Nintendo seemingly forgetting about their Smash Bros. Lightsaber, and then doing it again with this Darth Maul-style lightsaber for Kirby. They call it illegal fun, which is a bit dramatic, but it's a cool-looking ability, I must admit. There are some little captions next to screenshots. One says a level reminds them of the old Amiga game, Another World. Bit of a deep cut reference there. Another one mentions spear-chucking natives being irritatingly accurate enemies, which is a fair point, those guys were a pain. Another one mentions sucking and chucking being key to progress in a lava level, which is classic Kirby gameplay. And finally, they say Kirby is at his trickiest when the big bosses arrive. Which is definitely true, some of those bosses in Kirby 64 were proper tough if you weren't paying attention. Overall, it's a good overview of some of the fun ability combos in Kirby 64. It was a genuinely innovative system at the time, and definitely added a lot of depth to what could have just been another simple platformer. This page is all about the multiplayer modes in Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. It's got 3 modes on display. Skip and jump, which looks like a pretty basic race across some platforms. They call it belief-beggaringly primitive, which is a bit harsh, but I can see what they mean. Then there's fruit drop, which they reckon is like something from the ZX Spectrum back in 84, bit of a deep cut that, I remember those days, collecting falling fruit in a basket. Sounds simple enough, probably a bit chaotic with mates. Finally, Block Blast, Bomberman inspired apparently, knocking blocks about to get rid of your mates in a small arena. All sounds fairly standard party game fodder really. They've got a pluses and minuses section. Pluses are that Kirby's great, it's a looker, and the power-ups are brilliant fun. Minuses are that it's not quite enough of it, generic level design, and no reason to go back once you're done. Bit damning with faint praise there. Then there's an if you like this box recommending Yoshi's Story, giving it a solid 86%. saying, whistling dinosaurs gobbling fruit. Brilliant. Yeah, Yoshi's Story was a looker on the N64, wasn't it? Very different style. Accessibility is mentioned, saying it's uncomplicated so you'll have no problems. Visuals are described as lovely, but they reckon Yoshi's Story does 2D a bit better on the N64. Sounds are apparently toe-tappingly good. Mastery is deemed visually impressive, but nothing the SNES couldn't do, cheeky. Lifespan is pegged as short due to few secrets and low challenge. The verdict is pretty lukewarm. Gut-wrenching feeling that comes with the potential for something great being wasted. Short-lived and repetitive. Ouch. It gets a 72% in the end. Not terrible, but not amazing either. Seems like they think Kirby 64's multiplayer's a bit of a missed opportunity, which is a shame. Kirby games are usually pretty solid. This page welcomes you to Club 64, which is described as the section of the magazine designed to help you get the most out of your N64 games. It's from the June 2000 issue. This month's top guide is all about Tony Hawk's skateboarding, Activision's new stunt 'em up. Looks like they are telling you how to rack up some high scores. We've got screenshots of the game showing off some grinds and skaters in action. It was a pretty big deal at the time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Everyone was trying to land those tricks. On the right side, we've got the contents of this month's Club 64. First up is the mailbox on page 74 for your gripes and groans. Then there's a how-to guide for Ridge Racer 64 on page 82, teaching you how to be king of the road. Following that is another how-to section for Operation Winback on page 84, telling you how to win at that. Tips Extra is on page 88, with top tips for the latest N64 titles. Sounds useful. Then there is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic on page 93, promising to solve your problems. Solved by the good doctor. Cheeky. Game On page 94, features 8 all-new gaming challenges. I'm the Best is on page 96, asking, but are you? Find out here. Then, Millennium on page 100 says, the new league tables are starting to fill up. For all those high-score chasers, there's a directory on page 104 for things you should probably look at before you buy anything. Finally, back issues and subscriptions are on page 114 if you are missing any issues or want to subscribe, and there's the N64 Magazine logo with a page number 73. Looks like a packed issue this month. This page is the mailbox section, Club 64. We've got the star letter this month, titled It's a May. Someone reckons they've seen a bloke who looks just like Mario, even down to the moustache. Bit of a laugh, I suppose. Matthew Sexton from Bedford wrote in. Then there's a letter complaining about the games deals who apparently aren't so great dealing with N64 stuff. Alan Johnson from St Albans is moaning that they don't seem to acknowledge N64 owners properly and have better deals for PlayStation owners. He even mentions dodgy multilingual instruction manuals. Typical. Tazaba. Next up, Kim Titley from Telford is talking about bug-eyed dogs and star constellations after looking at an astronomy book. He mentions seeing Lupus and Vela and wonders if Rare, the guys who did GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, might be looking to the stars for inspiration for new games, mentioning Jet Force Gemini. Bit of a reach maybe, but who knows with those creative lot at Rare. Finally we have the correction corner, where Mark's in the doghouse. Stefan Knott from Torquay is correcting a review score for 1080 degrees in issue 14, saying they got the colour wrong on the verdict box. It should have been green, not yellow apparently. Bit picky if you ask me. Ed Wilkins from Malmesbury is pulling them up on a how-to guide for Toy Story 2 in issue 40, saying they got the Stargame symbol wrong and the percentage. Someone's really keeping tabs on these things. Cool! And Joseph Harris from Anglesey is furious about a screenshot in a sewer guide for South Park Rally, calling Mark Green an imbecile and suggesting someone should murder him for using the wrong screenshot. Bit strong reaction for a game about fart jokes. Ed, the editor, just says, a little harsh maybe. You can say that again. Chris Mason from South Glamorgan is pointing out a caption error in issue 39 about Metapod in Pokemon Snap, calling someone Kakuna whoever and suggesting they should be fired. Again, Ed's response is, Mark's clearing his desk. Sounds like Mark's having a tough time of it this month. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section. Looks like readers are writing in with their thoughts and questions. First up, we've got a letter about winged sandals, where someone's noticed the similarities between Link from Zelda and Perseus from Greek mythology. They're talking about the winged boots, magic wallet, and invisibility cap, and even Link having a sword that can't be broken, just like Perseus. Freddie from Wimbledon wants to know if we've got any comments. The mag's reply is pretty spot on, saying it's interesting and doesn't stop there, mentioning Perseus slaying Medusa and Link heading up Death Mountain Trail, making the connection to the Gorgon. It's a fair point, Nintendo definitely took some inspiration there. Zelda games are full of that kind of stuff. Next there's a Togepi letter from Tom in Cornwall. He's writing to correct some misinformation about Pokemon Yellow. Seems someone else, Kunal Gupta, wrote in previously, and was a bit misleading about Pokemon Yellow. Tom's setting the record straight, saying Yellow isn't really different from Red and Blue, and there's no Togepi to be caught. The mag confirms he's right and says to look out for a Pokemon Yellow review in the next issue. Bit of a kerfuffle about Pokemon, as always back then, Leia. Then we have Mouthwaters from Richard in Lancaster. He's chuffed about the Perfect Dark delay, surprisingly. He reckons with GCSEs coming up in May, it's actually a good thing, as he can focus on revision, and then have the game to look forward to in June. He's really hyped for Perfect Dark, saying absolutely nothing else will matter, and his mouth is watering at the prospect. The mag replies, they are glad someone is happy about the delay. Perfect Dark, yeah, that was a big deal, everyone was waiting for that one after GoldenEye, though maybe not happy about a delay, but I get his point about exams. Weird is next, from David in Bishop Stortford. He saw Rachel Lillis, who voices Misty in Pokemon, in a music video with some other girl on a music channel. The video showed clips from the Pokemon movie, and the song is by M2M called Don't Say You Love Me. He's wondering if Nintendo promoted it as it seems a bit random. The mag clarifies that the song is indeed from the Pokemon movie soundtrack, which was in cinemas at the time, and probably plays during the end credits. M2M, yeah, that was a pop group doing a Pokemon song. A bit cheesy, but it was everywhere back then. Tie-ins were all the rage. DreamON section has game ideas. James from Bude has an idea called Pikachu Gotta Pokem All. Mad idea, basically you control Pikachu and swipe at 251 Pokemon, electrocuting them. You could use gold and silver Pokemon too, and Pikachu's tail is the weapon. You can even get a mini electric car that works once you stick Pikachu's tail in it. And there's a girlfriend Pikachu to rescue. Ed from the mag comments it sounds like 2 games in one, a Pokemon electrocuting game and a Pokemon game of life. Sounds a bit bonkers, but kids come up with all sorts. Lastly, Mario Soccer, from David in Wrexham. He's suggesting a Mario football game, where you control Mario and mates, like Man U, or Arsenal-level teams, and when someone scores they do the Mario Kart taunt. Each character would have different skills, Donkey Kong big and strong, Toad small and fast. He wonders if it could be a dolphin game, for GameCube maybe. Ed replies that the N64 could definitely do with another football game, whilst waiting for ISS Millennium. Mario Soccer, well we did get Mario Strikers later on, didn't we? Not a bad shout really. Warrington Norsa has Millennium. Overall just a typical letters page, bit of Zelda, a lot of Pokemon and Perfect Dark chat, and some crazy game ideas. Good times. This page in N64 Magazine, it's the letters page, Mailbox Club 64, always a good laugh to see what the readers were on about. First up, someone called Company, down threatening to take Andrea's dreaded stick. Sounds like a bit of office banter if you ask me. Ed's response, we'd like to see you try, is classic. Then Matthew Ebbs is questioning if the letters are even real, the cheek of it. Followed by Jenny Laying needing to go to bed at 1 AM, relatable stuff that. Mark N. Ticknap talking about people falling flat on their faces, and Alex Bull just checking if anyone's there, typical letter page filler really. Bob Marks is asking about Joanna Dark looking like a fruit and a babe, bit crude, even for back then. Ed's reply is pretty funny. What fruit would that be? Toby Petty brings up hypocrisy. Deep stuff for a Games Mag letters page. Moving on, Christopher Godfrey's confused eye section is about Zelda, questioning why Mido is at Lon Lon Ranch if Kokiri kids can't leave the forest. A fair point actually, these Zelda plot holes, eh? Then there's Scallywag from Johnny Chisdini, a tale of school mischief with corks and thinking one looked like a Goron. Kids will be kids, I suppose. Graham Elaine is confused too about Mystical Ninja games, wondering about Mystical Ninja Directory and Mystical Ninja 2. Ed's reply clarifies they're 2 different games, Goemon being the original name in Japan, and that Mystical Ninja 2 wasn't quite as good as the first one which came out in '98. They recommend keeping an eye out for Mystical Ninja if you're after a cheap 2D platformer. There's a little screenshot from Mystical Ninja 2 there. Looks alright, not as visually impressive as some N64 games mind you. Finally there's the So Tell Me This section with Tom Davis asking a couple of questions about Perfect Dark and expansion packs. Ed confirms Perfect Dark won't come with an expansion pack, and advises to buy the official one to avoid disappointment. Good advice as always. Then G. Hughes is asking about Jungle Emperor Leo and Majula's Mask, Zelda Dolphin on N64, Resident Evil 0, Fighters Destiny 2 on PAL, Wild Metal Country on Dreamcast, and Metroid 4 on N64. Quite the list. Ed says Jungle Emperor Leo is cancelled. Majora's Mask identity is debated amongst the staff. Skull Kid vs Mask Seller. Shigsy saying Zelda Dolphin is years away and maybe won't even happen. Resi Zero and Fighters Destiny 2 PL are unlikely. Wild Metal Country Dreamcast was boring. And Metroid 4 on N64, no news from E3 yet. Always keeping us informed, those N64 mag lads. And that's your lot for this page of readers' questions. This page is the N64 Magazine's board section, and they've also got a bit called Dolphin Factory. Right then, so the board is showcasing readers' artistic talents, bless 'em. Looks like kids have been sending in their drawings, pinned to a corkboard effect. We've got some colourful Pokemon pictures from a Helen Chan in Coventry, very nice. And a Pikachu drawing by Heather Shepherd, quite cheeky that one. There's also some Technicolor Pokemon from Lee Webster, getting creative there. Someone called Tracy Chung has done a Jet Force Gemini piece, showing those Gemini twins, very colourful. And UHM, yeah, a bit chaotic, Jet Force Gemini style really. Laura Davison from Cambridge has drawn a load of Nintendo characters. Mario, a penguin thing, Toad, all the usual suspects. Then there's Banjo-Kazooie's Gruntilda, drawn by Kim Wilson, spooky witch she is. And finally, a Benjo Farago from Coventry has also done a Banjo-Kazooie one, looks like Klungo maybe. Borintilda. Over on the Dolphin Factory bit, they are asking what Nintendo's next console, the Dolphin, might look like. There's some concept art of a controller and console design sent in by readers. One of them is from a mad scientist Reino Summer, and it's a pretty detailed drawing of a Dolphin controller. Looks a bit like a melted GameCube controller to be honest, with a screen in the middle and slots for memory cards and rumble packs. They reckon you could adjust the height of the analog stick, fancy that. Another controller idea is from Adam Lockley, with a visual memory unit like the Dreamcast. Showing what you're doing in the game, bit of a gimmick if you ask me, but alright. And someone else, no name given sadly, has sent in a design for the console itself. A kind of transparent lid with bright colours. Not sure about that one. Bit too garish maybe. They want more designs sent in, so get your pens out kids. This page is all about how to get massive scores in Tony Hawk's skateboarding on the N64. It's giving you the inside scoop, like a little cheat sheet for racking up the points, saying it's the key to getting truly massive scores. They're calling it a definitive guide, which is a bit much, but fair enough. It's from N64 Magazine, they know their stuff usually. Alan Madrell's written it, whoever he is. The article is broken down into 5 magical all-purpose tips for high scores. Tip number 1 is all about dedication, getting to know the levels properly, and planning your runs. Which makes sense, you can't just jump in and expect to be amazing straight away, can you? Then it's about making your tricks complicated, doing spins, and always having a rail to grind on. They're pushing for those rail-to-rail transfers, and cheeky bonuses to boost your score. Classic Tony Hawk stuff, combo madness. Number 3 is about varying your stunts, telling you the game penalizes repetition, which is good to know. Apparently if you repeat a trick, it's worth half the points, even if you mess it up. So mix it up, don't be a one-trick pony. Tip 4 is about practicing 180 flip tricks in the middle of a grind, saying it's essential for hitting the hundreds of grindable surfaces. Right you are, getting those flip tricks in grinds is always a good shout for points. True. Lastly, they're saying the first combo is the most important, to make it big and get it right. Start strong, set the tone for the rest of your run, yeah that makes sense. Ryu. There's a little box called What We Said, which is a throwback to their review in issue 41. They gave it 86% and called it original, intuitive and enjoyable, and said it set a very high standard for skateboarding games on the N64. Which looking back it kind of did, didn't it? It was the first proper 3D skateboarding game that really nailed it on console. Good times. This page focuses on Tony Hawk's skateboarding, a proper classic on the N64, showing tips and tricks for getting high scores in different levels. Warehouse, school, and mall. They're showing where to find the hidden videotapes in each level too, which was always a good challenge back in the day. Warehouse is described as the first area, and best for honing your skills, with advice to do a 900 over the halfpipe. School, apparently, is full of grindable objects and swimming pools. Sounds about right, remember spending ages in that level. And mall escalators and stairs for grinding, making it an arcade mine of potential, they reckon. They've even got a section on the best character, saying Jamie Thomas is the top choice, as he's good for flip tricks and his special moves are easy to execute with just up and down movements. Sensible advice for beginners really. The score to beat on these levels seems to be around 200,000 to 250,000, which is a decent target. Good memories of trying to nail those scores back then. This page is all about getting better at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater on the N64, classic game that one. It's a how-to guide, breaking down tips for 3 levels: skate park, downtown, and downhill jam. For skate park, it's your first contest level apparently, and the magazine suggests mastering one trick for it. They point out the large halfpipe at the start, and the girder above it for big points if you're feeling tricky. They reckon you can rack up a decent score here, about 100,000 points to beat. Downtown focuses on grinds, especially off moving cars, bit ambitious back then, but sounds fun. There's a hidden videotape to find on a rooftop, and tips on grinding rails around a fountain, and even traffic lights. Score to beat here is much higher, over 200,000 points, so they clearly expect you to be getting better by this point. Downhill jam is all about big air and overhead rails, which sounds like it could get a bit hairy. They mention a tricky gap, and using the halfpipe for air and kickflips. There's a hidden videotape here too, naturally, and a rail at the top of the dam. Score to beat is lower again here, around 70,000, maybe it's more about speed and style on this one. Nanuthal. Oh, and there's a little box about hidden characters, Officer Dick and Private Carrera. Apparently you need to collect 30 tapes and 3 medals to unlock one of them. Don't spoil the surprise though, they say. Right you are. Wouldn't want to ruin the surprise of playing as a rent-a-cop or a soldier, would we? The next page is all about how to score big in Tony Hawk skateboarding on the N64, proper classic that one. It's part of a Club 64 HOWT section. They're breaking down 3 levels to get some decent scores. Hecky. First up is Burnside, reckoned to be a purpose-built park for getting good combinations. They're saying the eyeball bit is prime for racking up points with grinds and aerial tricks. Apparently the whole area is grindable, which is good for combos. Tip is to use kickflips after grinds. Score to beat on this level is 273,202. Then it's San Francisco, asking if you're going to San Francisco and to grind a few cop cars for them. Cheeky! They mention a hidden videotape, and the easiest way to get it is to head right at the bottom of the hill, jump up the quarterpipe, and get onto the rooftop. The center is good for grinding, and the halfpipe area has leveled jumps for sequences. They say balancing is easy with taps on the D-pad, and to add special moves and wall slides to your combo. Score to beat here is 184,566. Finally Roswell, saying aliens love to skate. It's official. They reckon a 720. Benihana is a good start. There's a metal pipe worth 40,000 points if it's flashing yellow. They recommend a nollie plus 720 Madonna and a special bar shoulder move. Apparently the bowl is good for grinding transfers, and you can get an alien mashing bonus. Kick flipping from the top of the hump is good for max air. Score to beat is 172,118, and they call it the most difficult course by a long way. So there you go, some tips to get your scores up in Tony Hawk's on the N64. Good game that. This page is about being the king of the road in Ridge Racer 64. Right at the top, in big letters it says how to be king of the road in Ridge Racer 64. It's got that typical N64 magazine style, with the bold colors and fonts. There's a picture of a woman, who I guess is supposed to be a racer, looking pretty pleased with herself. Underneath the big title, there's a section called What We Said, which is referencing their previous review of Ridge Racer 64 in issue 40. Apparently they gave it a stonking 91%. Blimey, that's a proper score. They quoted themselves as saying, "It might lack depth, but Ridge Racer 64 is easily one of the N64's most exhilarating games. A perfectly crafted marvel." High praise indeed, though perfectly crafted marvel sounds a bit much, even for Ridge Racer 64, which was alright, to be fair. Then there's a section called Bonus Cars, showing you how to unlock some secret vehicles. There's the caddy car, which you get by smashing through the wall behind you at the start of a Grand Prix race and finishing first. Sounds a bit daft, but back then we were all for these sorts of hidden extras. They say it's got great top speed but awful acceleration makes it all but useless. Sounds about right for a bonus car, more of a novelty than anything else. Checha. Next up is Blinky, described as a do-eyed ghost. You get this by starting and being slinky on turn 3. They reckon its low speed is a disappointment, but its eyes light up in darkened tunnels, which is brilliant. Again, sounds like a bit of a laugh. Lastly, there's Puka, another Pac-Man ghost. This one's relatively slow with good acceleration, but it's the handling that scuppers it. Puka turns like a brick. Save it for the extreme tracks, where there are few troublesome turns, they advise. So basically, it's not great, but might be fun on the easier tracks. Chatty. Each car has a little screenshot, showing it in action, and the usual game stats like time and rank. It's all classic N64 magazine stuff really, telling you how to get the most out of your games with these little tips and tricks. Good times. This page is all about becoming the king of the road in Ridge Racer 64, proper arcade racer that one. It's giving tips for multiplayer mode, with Martin and Mark battling it out. They reckon good acceleration is key, suggesting the extreme green and atomic purple cars, both are fast, no messing about. Tip number 2 is all about the start, hitting that rev needle between 5,000 and 6,000 revolutions per minute for a boost. Standard stuff really, but crucial. Then it's about using the rear view to block your opponent, power sliding around corners to get ahead, and using the barriers to your advantage, maybe even nudging your mate into them cheeky. Apparently tunnels are scary for most racers, but not for Martin who just blasts through. And finally, a bit of underhand tactics with the handicap option to get one over on your mate. Sneaky, but all's fair in love and Ridge Racer, eh? Then there's a bit about Galaga 2000, the hidden game in Ridge Racer 64. Everyone knew about this back then, a proper blast from the past. It says you get a version of Namco's classic shooter every time you finish the Extreme Extra course. To get the Galaga 88 spaceship, you need 40 hits in the Galaga game classic. Proper old school fun. For the Ultra 64 car in Ridge Racer, you just need to complete all the Platinum Cups. They're saying Galaga 88 is perfect for power slides because of the minimal grip, which sounds like a laugh. It then breaks down the Galaga 2000 gameplay wave by wave. First wave from the right zigzagging, second wave from the left, then S-shapes, then another wave from the left. Apparently it's easy to hit the ships if you keep to the right. Get 40 hits and you get the Galaga 88 ship, and a brilliant new tune, based on Namco's arcade classics. Nice touch. This page then is all about Operation Winback, a title we reviewed in issue 41, and it's got a solid 83% score, not bad at all. They're calling it a star game too, with a quote comparing it to feeling like Clint Eastwood with a .44 Magnum. Bit dramatic, but I get the idea. It's a guide on how to win at Winback, and they're saying it's a sneaktastic shootfest, Nintendo's answer to Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation. Bit of a bold claim that considering Metal Gear Solid was pretty revolutionary, but Winback had its moments. They reckon it's got stealth and gung-ho gameplay, and makes you feel like James Bond. I suppose there is a bit of that in there. Taking on the role of Jean-Luc Cougar, blimey, what a name. And going up against villains with names like Gunt and Deathmask. Sounds like a right laugh. No sir. The main point here is unlocking all the modes. To get trail mode you just have to complete the game on easy, which sounds straightforward enough, and means you can play any level you fancy. Max power mode requires completing it on medium, which gives you all weapons and infinite ammo. Handy for a bit of mindless fun, that is. Then there's sudden death mode, which you unlock by completing it on hard, where it's one-shot kills for everyone, terrorists, crates and even yourself. Sounds a bit stressful, that does. Finally, there's a bit about endings. Apparently if the satellite fires on levels 23 and 27 you get the worst ending. If it only fires on one of them, you get the middle one, and if it doesn't fire at all you get the best ending. Right then, something to aim for if you want to see the proper conclusion to Jean-Luc Cougar's adventure. All in all, looks like a decent guide to get the most out of Operation Winback. This page is all about getting your own back in Winback, covert operations. Right then, Who's the Boss is called, and it's giving us the lowdown on how to tackle the main baddies in the game. Hey. First up is Leela. Apparently, you need to take out the extra terrorist chaps first before focusing on her, using the pillars and medkits to your advantage, and then hitting her with a rocket launcher or submachine gun. Sounds like classic run-and-gun stuff from that era. Nor. Next is Cecile. This one's about creeping up the ramp slowly and dodging laser traps. Standard stuff really, just take them out once they're in range. Worry. Then there's Ryan, camera lock, submachine gun to pistol switcheroo, and then lobbing a grenade while getting as far away as possible. A bit more tactical perhaps. Sora. Duke is next, and it sounds like you're meant to lure him into shooting barrels, then blast him with a shotgun and keep on in between attacks. Fair enough. Thunder needs you to get in close, kneel down, and hit him with a shotgun. Apparently if you're quick he won't even get to use his flamethrower. Cheeky. Finally, the Traitor. This one is all about using sensors to set him up, shooting barrels behind him and moving left and right to dodge grenades. If he gets up against the wall you need to set the sensor again to get close and finish him with a shotgun. Seems a bit fiddly, but hey, that was gaming back then. Shruss. Then there's a section called Walk Like a Panther, with general tips. Know your enemy is basically saying learn the level layouts and enemy patterns. No surprises there, that's just playing the game really. Swing Low is about crouching to be harder to hit. Makes sense. Too many of them is about dealing with multiple enemies. Forward roll to cover, camera lock, pick off the closest, that kind of thing. Snap is about using the camera to look around corners for planning routes, which could be handy. And Suicide Blonde is about knife-wielding enemies, suggesting a shotgun to deal with them quickly and not getting too close. Lastly, there's a bit about people points. Apparently, you unlock extra characters by getting certain scores in the game. Leela unlocks at 13,000, Leon at 15,000, Ryan at 17,000, Thunder and Duke both at 19,000, Bandera at 23,000, Jin at 27,000, Deathmask at 29,000, and Cecile right at the top at 31,000. So plenty of reason to replay it, and get a good score then. The scoring section explains how to get a high score using no medkits, standard pistol only, not getting hurt, especially against bosses, and completing it quickly. So basically, be good at the game to get a good score. Groundbreaking stuff, eh? But yeah, it's all about bragging rights and unlocking those extra characters, wasn't it? Good times. The next page in this issue is all about getting better at Winback, that slightly clunky third-person shooter. It's under the How to Club 64 inches banner. First tip is laser roll, which is about those red laser beams, telling you to roll under the first two, and then shoot the terrorists with submachine guns. Apparently, a frustrating bloke comes out to reset the lasers if you mess it up. They say stand against the wall, and you won't have to roll again. Sounds a bit fiddly, but that's Winback for you. Next, it's faster. Just saying you get rewarded for finishing levels quickly, which is pretty obvious really. Jean-Luc is pictured, saying, "Alright then, we better get a move on, we've got to secure that express elevator." Right, cheers Jean-Luc, noted. Then, pick 'em off quick, is about locking onto enemies, telling you to hold R, and nudge the analog stick. A red flash means you've got your laser sight trained on their bonts, which is a funny way of saying head, isn't it? Firestarter tells you how to unlock Thunder's flamethrower in multiplayer mode by pressing R+B. Thunder's flamethrower, yeah, sounds about right for a bit of multiplayer mayhem. Hey, moving targets is just common sense, saying don't waste ammo on moving targets unless they are rushing you. Again, stating the obvious a bit there. Whippersniper is about using the submachine gun for longer range shots. They reckon it's a bit of a waste of ammo, but if you want to be a faraway sniper then go for it. They say to use the bottom C button to camera lock, and then switch back to the pistol once locked on. Sounds like a bit of a faff, but each to their own. Reach Ammo Packs points out that in the room where you find the first ammo pack, if you wait and don't kill the terrorist, he'll put another medkit on the table. Sweet! They also mention there's another ammo pack in the truck, on the second stage. Good to know for ammo hoarders like me, Dory. Mr. Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is about using explosives to get rid of explosive crates guarded by slipshod crying godsends. They say the baddies sometimes lurk behind them. Apparently it can be a bit tricky to perfect shooting the crates from behind, but worth it to remove the lock from your enemy. Sounds like a bit of a challenge. Finally, I'll need guns, reviews the weapons. Pistol, they say infinite ammo, and good for 90% of situations. Pop up, shoot a couple of slugs, and get back down again. Don't get caught reloading. Standard pistol advice really. Submachine gun, they call it a delight to use, good range and rapid fire, best weapon by far. Use it to conserve pistol ammo, especially for bosses. Can't argue with that, submachine gun is usually the go-to in these games. Chua. Shotgun, rocks our world at close range, but suffers badly elsewhere. Best indoors, good for taking nearby enemies down quick, but slow reload, don't get caught short. Good for bosses, shotgun in a corridor, classic U. Duty, C4 explosives, not actually a weapon, but essential for turret guns that don't swivel. Get close to the wall, set the charge, light the blue touch paper, and stand well clear. Yeah, C4, always good for a bit of demolition. Etero. So yeah, some useful tips for Winback there. A bit basic, but handy if you're just starting out. Winback, a bit of a Marmite game, wasn't it? Some loved it, some hated it. I thought it was alright, bit clunky but had its moments. This page is a how-to guide for getting through the first section of Operation Winback on the N64, eh? Right then, let's have a butcher's. It's broken down into 3 stages, each with a target time, which is a bit of a challenge, even for old hands. Stage 1 is all about causing a bit of chaos right from the off. They tell you to shoot an explosive crate to get things started, then there's a bit where you've got to grab some ammo, and then destroy another crate to reveal a terrorist. Classic. Finally, you're picking off chaps from a trench and dealing with a few more blokes and boxes. Target time of 7 minutes, blimey, they're not messing about. Stage 2 bumps up the target time to 12 minutes. This one involves pushing a button to reveal a laser control box. Sounds a bit fiddly. Then it's about unexpected exploding walls, moving quickly to avoid pipes, and shooting a barrel to get past a barrier. Oh, and apparently, there's a key hidden by a guard in a corner. Right you are, sir. Stage 3, and the target time is down to 9 minutes. Submachine gunners and snipers, they say, you'll need to use C4 for a gun, and apparently there's a rocket launcher to be had. Seems like they're ramping up the firepower. You need to shoot a control box from a corner, and there's a box in the back of a truck for more ammo. Handy. Down at the bottom, they're asking for readers to send in their fastest times for these stages, bragging about their own times and points. Sharpshooting skills, they call it. A bit cheeky, aren't they? They want you to complete these levels in trial mode, and send in photos or videos of your times to N64 Magazine in Bath. Very keen, aren't they? One-shot kills count, apparently. Right then, challenge accepted. This page is from the tips section, Tips EXT, and this time it's all about cheat codes and tips for a couple of N64 games. Cheshire. First up, we've got Vigilante 8, Second Offense. That was a bit of alright, wasn't it? This section is giving you a load of cheat codes to punch in. They're for things like attracting enemies, having big wheels always a laugh, making the cars faster, heavier, higher suspensions, taking away gravity, that sort of thing. Standard cheat code fodder really, you know how it is. They even mention needing the 4 MB expansion pack for the ultra-high resolution code, which was a bit of a must-have back then to make things look less blurry. Then, we've got some tips for Operation Winback. This was that game where you were running around shooting terrorists, a bit like GoldenEye but maybe not quite as polished if I'm being honest. It's got tips for using C4 in multiplayer, finding extra health, unlocking a trial mode with some button combo, and a trick to get a better lock-on range for your pistol by switching to the machine gun first. Sneaky tactics for sneaky games. Page 88 of issue 42, according to the bottom there, another page of tips for your N64 gaming needs. This page is all about cheat codes and classic tips, proper retro stuff. First up it's South Park Rally, yeah that kart racer, not exactly Mario Kart was it, but they've got the unlock codes for hidden characters. Seems you had to beat certain tracks in championship mode to get your hands on them. Mr. Garrison, Mr. Mackey, Big Gay Al, Mephisto, Grandpa, Jesus, Satan, Ned and Damien are all mentioned and the tracks you need to beat. Rally Days 2 for Garrison, Spring Cleaning for Mackey, Pink Lemonade for Big Gay Al, and so on. Bit of a grind to unlock them all, wasn't it? Warrington Norsa? Then there's Nuclear Strike 64, remember that one? Helicopter action game, a bit intense at the time. They've got cheat codes for that too, 50% more armor with PCPNL and invulnerability with CPPML. And if you wanted to cause even more chaos, quad damage with BDGFK. Handy if you were struggling with that one, it could get pretty tough. Finally, they've got a classic tip for Wave Race 64. Wave Race still looks pretty good even now, doesn't it? Apparently you can ride a dolphin in Dolphin Park. Says you gotta go to stunt mode in Dolphin Park, do a hood stand with somersault, riding backwards, and a handstand between checkpoints 1 and 2, then a clockwise barrel roll, backflip, and submarine dive between checkpoints 2, and the end. Sounds like a right faff to be honest, but they reckon if you reset and go back into Dolphin Park warm-up, you can ride the dolphin. How good is that, they ask? Well, I suppose if you've got the time to mess about with all that stunt guff, then yeah, dolphin riding. Each to their own, eh? Good bit of nostalgia though, digging these old tips out. This page is from the Tips Extra section of Club 64 in N64 Magazine, focusing on reader-submitted game tips. It's all about cheats and tips for N64 games back in the day. Bolas. The main feature is Reader's Top 15 Tips, and this month's Cheat of the Month is for GoldenEye 007, a cheat code to unlock the Caverns level. Someone called Ian Thompson emailed that one in. Bernal. Then there are loads of short tips for different games submitted by readers. For Rocket, Robot on Wheels, there's a tip about making your robot faster, submitted by Philip Griffiths. Donkey Kong 64 gets a couple of mentions, one for priming your gun in multiplayer, and another about finding Cranky Kong for the first time if you are struggling, sent in by Mark and Jimmy Dyke respectively. 2. Resident Evil 2 has a tip for Claire's Mission B to avoid zombies, submitted by Jamie McKenzie. Battletank 64 has a tip to blow yourself up using all the C buttons, sent by Jeremy Sims. WWF WrestleMania 2000 has a tip about manager control in one-on-one matches by Jimmy Dyke again. Another Donkey Kong 64 tip here, this time about Candy and Funky Kong, selling you new wares regardless of previous levels, sent by Paul Lenton. Knockout Kings 2000 has button bashing tips for bruises and cuts, or just bruises, from Zishan Ajmal. Turak. Rage Wars has a cheeky tip for playing against the computer, where they might ignore you if your health is low, submitted by Sam Gosling. WWF Attitude features a tip to unlock Dude Love and Cactus Jack via the character select screen, sent by Matthew Hyde. Jet Force Gemini has a mention about Rare Shuriken, from Luke Nucifora. Donkey Kong 64 comes up again with a tip about getting infinite banana fairies and invisibility, sent by Yvonne Brown. Command & Conquer 64 is mentioned, with a tip for auto-targeting using the D-pad and L button, sent by Stefan Perkowski. Operation Winback has a tip for racking up points in story or trial mode by not using your handgun, sent by Yvonne Brown again. Finally, Space Station. Silicon Valley has a weird tip about killing a sheep on the first level, hoisting it onto a dog and taking it to a bridge for something to happen, sent by Joseph Westwood. Mad stuff? Recos. There are screenshots for Donkey Kong 64, WWF WrestleMania 2000, and Space Station's Silicon Valley. At the bottom, there's a form for readers to send in their own top tips, encouraging them to write in for a chance to win a rather flash N64 pin badge, and maybe even get featured as Cheat of the Month. Looks like they were really keen for reader input back then, before the internet made game tips instantly available everywhere. It was all about magazines like this for your cheat fix. This page is from Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, a regular feature in the magazine. It's all about getting advice on your gaming problems. There's a picture of Dr. Kit's himself, looking quite serious in his white coat, bless him. Above him, there's a bit about Mew from Pokemon, calling it a new species, which is a laugh. Everyone knew about Mew even back then. It mentions it's the 151st Pokemon, and that only a few people had seen it worldwide. Right, typical Nintendo hype. Paymaya. Paymaya. Then we get to the questions. First up, Gavin from Ayrshire is asking about Mew in Pokemon Red or Blue. Bless him, still trying to catch Mew legitimately. Dr. Kits, playing it cool, says you can't find Mew in the game naturally, and back then the only way was a Nintendo download event, remember those? Queuing up to get Mew downloaded onto your cart, proper faff. Next, Benjamin from Teesdale is stuck on Jet Force Gemini, can't get to the asteroid level even though he's got all the ship parts and spoken to King Jeff. Dr. Kits tells him to get the earplugs for the bear in Mizar's palace. Classic Jet Force Gemini cryptic advice, eh? Bore. Then there's Matthew from Frinton, moaning about a spot of blood in Perfect Dark. Dr. Kits plays it deadpan, says it's just a spot of blood, get over it, you need to speak to King Jeff twice then you can fight Mizar. Right you are, move on mate, Larku. Jenny from Finland is having trouble with Donkey Kong 64, the gloomy galleon level, and those mechanical fish. He can't shoot all the panels in time. Dr. Kits suddenly goes a bit mad and hurls a chair through the window apparently. Bit dramatic, Doc. Anyway, his actual advice is to use the warp near the lighthouse, shoot the fish quickly, and shoot the next panel before the blade stops spinning. Standard Donkey Kong 64 stuff really. Warringtoning. Finally, Matthew from Surrey can't destroy the Star Destroyer in Shadows of the Empire. Dr. Kits, in his infinite wisdom, just asks, how do you blow it up? Helpful as ever, Doc. He then says, nothing happens. Cheers for that insightful advice. At the bottom there's a Got a Gaming Query section, asking for people to send in their problems to Dr. Kits at the N64 Magazine address, and a little form to fill in. All in all, standard Dr. Kits fare, a bit of light-hearted help and sarcasm. Takes me back. This page is all about challenges to test your skills on the N64. It's headed, 8 challenges to test the best. Game On. Sounds like they were celebrating their birthday. Game On's birthday next month actually. They mention the postman being overloaded with challenge entries, even from places as far afield as Australia, Finland and even Hull. 8 brow-furrowing, hair-tearing challenges are promised. If you complete them all, you're supposed to scan the opposite page to see what to do next. The first challenge is for Jet Force Gemini, Jet Set Kiddies. It mentions Robin Mudd of Chipperfield coming up with it. It's after you beat Mizar for the first time on the SS Anubis level. You have to fly from the pond, charge your jetpack to 100%, and jet across the ramp using as little fuel as possible. They even restricted their jets to short spurts, cheeky blighters. The fuel targets are fuel, used 40%, 50%, and 60% for the medals. Next up is GoldenEye 007, Magnum Mayhem. Thought up by Joe Ridley, of Australia, apparently because he was chuffed with it. It's on the train level. You have to activate all weapons and infinite ammo, guide Bond into the final carriage, and pump a few bullets into Xenia Onatop. Then, and here's the clever bit, leave your watch laser untouched, and blow the floor hatch open with just your 2 magnums. Each hinge takes 3 shots. Time targets are 30, 20 and 10 seconds left on the timer for medals. Seems a bit fiddly to me, but alright. Then there's Donkey Kong 64, Cat the Cobbler. This one is Monkey Smash, the multiplayer mode. You've got to play as Lanky Kong for this one, while the other Kongs are underneath. You've got a minute to stock up on ammo and grenades in Arena 3, then give your foes what for. First to survive, gets the gold medal. Survival times are 3, 2 and 1 minute for the medals. Mike Bromby from Hull shouts Cobbler when Lanky Kong jumps. Alright then Mike. Finally, another GoldenEye 007 challenge. Mines all mines. Chris Rose and Philip Porter from Ashbourne came up with this one. It's a 2-player game in the basement GoldenEye room. Spread proximity mines around. Grab a batch in the column-filled basement. Your partner does the same. Switch places. Use a rapid-fire gun and clear your room of explosives. First player to feel the icy touch of death loses. Medals for 5, 4, and 3 consecutive wins. Sounds like a right laugh, that one actually. This page from Club 64 is all about challenges. 8 challenges to test the best, it screams. Bit dramatic, but alright. Dalabre. First up is Super Smash Bros. With Kirby juggling. Basically, the idea is to rack up damage on Kirby, the pink blob, by juggling him in the air. Medals are awarded based on damage percentage, 999%, 500%, or a measly 100%. Right, good luck hitting 999%, sounds like a bit of a button-bashing marathon. Next, we've got F-Zero X and Dead End. This one's on Mute City, and it's all about surviving with as few deaths as possible. Medals for 6, 4, or even just 2 deaths. F-Zero X on Master Difficulty. Surviving at all is a challenge, let alone worrying about deaths. G. Then it's Super Mario 64, Turtle Coin Grab. This is set in Lethal Lava Land, classic Mario level. Collect coins and mushrooms after bouncing off a turtle shell. Medals based on points 150, 120, or a pathetic 90 points. Seems a bit simple, doesn't it? Finally, Turok 2, with Multi-Mine Mayhem. This one's a bit gruesome, even for Turok. Lay mines and lure dinos into them, aiming to blow off as many limbs as possible. Medals for 0, 1, or 2 limbs left. Lovely stuff. Down below it's your turn, asking readers to send in their own game challenges. They want to hear about nifty challenges for games like Resident Evil 2, Ridge Racer 64, the new Tetris and Super Mario 64. If they print your challenge, you get a knobbly N64 pin badge. Wow, a pin badge? Worth penning a challenge for that maybe? Send your ideas to Game On N64 Magazine at some address in Bath. Right then. This page screams about Nintendo games bending the rules of physics, and not in a good way apparently. We've got Mario dressed up as some sort of professor, complete with a mortarboard and a blackboard full of dodgy-looking equations, labeling it all, breaking the laws. The article below is moaning about how Nintendo characters get away with all sorts of physics-defying nonsense. It mentions how back in issue 31, they already had a good old rant about plot holes, but now they're focusing on how unrealistic Nintendo games are becoming. They're picking on things like Mario leaping 5 times his own height, which, come on, who hasn't noticed that since Super Mario 64 came out it's hardly new information? And then they're having a go at GoldenEye, asking why Bond's mines blow things up in the air but leave walls untouched. A fair point actually if you think about it. They even bring up poor old Link from Zelda, wondering why his hair doesn't get wet when he takes a dip in Lake Hylia, which is just getting really picky now, isn't it? It's all a bit tongue-in-cheek though, I reckon. Classic N64 Magazine taking the mickey but still loving the games really. You can see at the bottom it's issue 42 and page 116. This page is titled The Law WS, and it's having a bit of a laugh at the physics and logic in GoldenEye 007 and Resident Evil 2, classics on the N64 mind you. It's presented by Mark Green, seems like he's having a chuckle at some of the game's, shall we say, quirks? Kilenye. First up is GoldenEye 007. Question 1 asks why Bond can blow up gas tanks, but his own guns don't set off a gas explosion. It jokes that proximity is key, and that Bond's guns are too far away to cause a big bang, making reference to first-degree facial burns. Right, cheeky. Question 2 is about stealth and alarms. It's pointing out how the secret agent, Bond, can sneak into a bunker, set off an alarm by mistake, and then somehow the Russians regenerate ammo. The article calls it a biological process, implying it's a bit daft. Then it wonders how Bond can carry 5 guns and hundreds of clips without getting exhausted, saying it's from exhaustion. Sarcastic as you like. Finally, question 3 just asks plainly why the secret agent can't jump, and there's a little stick figure diagram showing Bond tripping over some barrels. Classic GoldenEye, you could practically do anything except jump. Still a brilliant game though, even with its silly bits. Chew. Jest. Then it moves on to Resident Evil 2. Question 1 is about Leon and Claire getting infected by the G-Virus but not turning into zombies straight away. It says it's at regular intervals, groups of the undead attack, but not immediately when exposed to the virus. Then it asks why it takes 3 seconds to push away 2 zombies, 6 seconds for 3 zombies, and 1 second for 1 zombie. Logic, eh? It's pointing out the odd timing in the game's mechanics, and that the zombies walk clear of Leon's flamethrower, but are killed outright by burning wreckage. Question 2 is about herbs. Leon finds a health-giving herb in a chest in the police station lobby, and later finds another in a chest on the first floor. It asks for 3 common herbs and the healing process, saying not to include teleportation or magic. It's making fun of how items just appear in chests, as if by magic. Which, yeah, it's a game. It's all a bit of fun at the expense of these great games. But we loved them anyway, didn't we? Good times. This page is all about breaking the laws of physics in video games, something we were always trying to do back in the day on the N64. It's got 2 sections focused on physics questions based on WWF, WrestleMania 2000 on the N64, and Jet Force Gemini, DAE. The WrestleMania 2000 bit asks some rather daft physics questions related to wrestling moves. It's all about mankind and HHH, asking about blood vessels and the force of mankind's elbow drop. Bit silly really, but I suppose they're trying to be clever linking physics to wrestling. Then there's a section on Jet Force Gemini, another physics brain teaser. They're asking about Juno in space and his protective clothing. And then questions about Lupus the dog battling ants on Mizar. And finally Vela, Juno's sister, inside a giant alien monster. It's all a bit of a laugh and trying to make you think a bit more about these games than just blasting away. Below that, there's a section called Never, which is highlighting some unbelievable things in games. They start with 1080 degrees snowboarding, mentioning the crazy 1080-degree spin move. It was mind-blowing at the time to see that in a game, even if it was a bit unrealistic. Then they mentioned Destruction Derby, calling it legalized road rage, and Wave Race 64, saying getting sick air on a jet ski isn't enough. They also talk about Tony Hawk's skateboarding, focusing on the amazing mid-air tricks and how skaters seem to reattach to their boards. Finally, they touch on IS-98, calling it liquid football, and going on about bicycle kicks and free kicks, which was probably a bit over the top, even back then. It's all about the slightly ridiculous and over-the-top stuff in games, which was a lot of fun. This page is having a bit of a laugh really, under the title Breaking the Laws. It's a cheeky look at the physics in a few N64 games, isn't it? First up is Pilot Wings 64, asking about the noise of traffic in little states, and then going on about the Birdman, and why his plastic wings are a terrible idea. Obvious really. They even ask about Ibis's jetpack, and how long her legs would last with those rocket emissions. Probably not long. Then it's Fighter's Destiny's turn, questioning Leon's one-handed backbreaker sounds painful, and they're wondering about the damage and the likelihood of an ambulance being needed after a big fall in the arena. There's also something about Abdul lifting buses with his bare hands, which is a bit much, even for a fighting game. And then cows dancing? What's all that about? Warrington Nebo. Lastly, they get stuck into Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. They're on about rolling stones in Kokiri Forest, and the forces making them move, and why there's sparkly lights around chests. Finally, they get to Link using his hookshot, asking about materials strong enough for vines, and what would happen to Link's wrist and forearm. If things went wrong, probably a proper mess. They even throw in Einstein, and clay musical instruments at the end. It's all a bit of fun, pointing out the silly bits in games we all loved playing back then. This page is the cover, or certainly feels like the cover for the next issue. Big and bold it screams Zelda Majora's Mask. Of course back then we were all properly hyped for this, after Ocarina of Time. It was touted as the sequel to the best game ever, which is a bold claim, but Ocarina was pretty special, wasn't it? They're saying it's hitting Japan first, and they'll have all the juicy details on how it plays. Worry. Then there's a plus, E3 special, section. Seems Martin's been off to E3 and brought back the gossip on loads of upcoming games. Let's see what's on the list. Conker's Bad Fur Day. That looked, shall we say, a bit different, even back then. Hey you Pikachu! Ha! Must be that microphone game. The World Is Not Enough. Another Bond game. Probably trying to cash in on GoldenEye. Mega Man 64, they keep churning out those Mega Man games, don't they? Mickey Speedway USA, right, a racer, naturally. Resident Evil 0? Intriguing. Must be a prequel then. StarCraft? On the N64? That's a bit of a surprise, proper PC game that. Super Mario Adventure? Possibly Super Mario 64 too? Turok 3, Dinosaurs and Guns, always a winning combo, and Pokemon Attack, sounds like another Pokemon Stadium type game. So a mixed bag of stuff coming up then. Looks like a decent issue to look forward to, especially for Zelda fans. This page, issue 43, is all about the N64 Reader Awards results. Finally, we get to see what everyone voted for. About time. There are even more picks, showing off RIQA, ISS Millennium, and Eternal Darkness. Reviewed games for this issue are F1 Championship, Excitebike 64, and Blues Brothers. You can pick up the mag from Monday the 12th of June from Nintendo Magazine. Skill Club Millennium is back, boasting tons of new tips and cheats, special investigations, whatever they are, Dolphin News, which is of course the GameCube as we know it now, and the reviews that are the only reviews you can trust. A bit cheeky if you ask me. They're really pushing Perfect Dark this month with a top secret giveaway, and they don't want you to miss it apparently. Next month it's all about Game Boy with Pokemon Yellow getting the full review treatment. And this is page 121, from June 2000. This page is a full-page advert for gameplay. You know, back when online game retailers were just becoming a thing. It's plastered with the slogan, "The Gateway to Games," which was pretty apt at the time, trying to sound futuristic and all. They're showing off a load of game boxes all tumbling around a swirling space background. You can spot things like Pokemon Stadium, Rainbow Six for the N64, Ridge Racer 64, Grand Theft Auto, which was a bit controversial back then, and Tony Hawk's Skateboarding, proper classics of the era all there. Down the side it's teasing what's inside the magazine. The reviews section is shouting about Perfect Dark, Mario Party 2 and Kirby 64. Perfect Dark was the GoldenEye follow-up, everyone was hyped for that, proper spy shooter, Mario Party 2 always good for a laugh with mates, and Kirby 64 a solid platformer. Then there's other great stuff, which is a bit of a mixed bag. Turok 3, which was getting some attention for being pretty brutal, a Shadow of Oblivion special investigation, sounds very mysterious. There's also mentions of Zelda, Majora's Mask with a future look, always keen to see more Zelda, and future looks at Excitebike 64, and Duck Dodgers. Bit random Duck Dodgers, but okay. Then Mario Tennis, Tony Hawk stunt tips which were always useful, previews for The World Is Not Enough, Banjo-Tooie, Resident Evil 0, playing guides for Operation Winback and Indie Racer 2000, quick tips for Ridge Racer 64, and something called I'm the Best Skill Club Millennium. Sounds like some kind of cheat code thing. At the bottom they've got little preview panels for Banjo-Tooie, Resident Evil 0, Planet Game Boy, Kirby 64, and Excitebike 64 with page numbers, giving you a little taster of what's coming up in the mag. Good times?